Ontological suffering. What happens when you don't trust your sense of reality? When the lines between you and the world around you become fuzzy, and your very existence seems uncertain. This is an idea called ontological insecurity that was first introduced by psychiatrist R.D. Laing in his book, The Divided Self. It's not just a mental state. It's a huge problem with how we think about who we are and how we live. Laing says that ontological insecurity is the feeling that one's being is weak and could fall apart. Life moves along a stable stage for most people. People, the world, and our sense of self are all things we trust. As for someone who is feeling ontological uncertainty, that stage is not stable. They may feel separate and question their thoughts or even their own sense of self. Laing found 3 fears that describe this state. The first is engulfment, which is the fear of losing oneself in relationships or giving in to other people's needs. This makes people avoid close relationships to protect a weak sense of who they are. The second is collapse, which is the fear of being smashed by inner chaos or the sheer size of life. The third is petrification, which is the feeling of being seen as an object without any personality or power. When someone has schizophrenia or extreme anxiety, their self-world boundaries often break down, which can lead to ontological insecurity. Laing didn't see it as a disorder, but as a reaction to a world that was confusing or made people feel alone. This idea sounds like nihilistic thought. For SRA, the disorienting awareness of presence, also known as nausea, is like ontological insecurity in that it makes things less stable. Heidegger's idea of thresh, which means being thrown into a world we can't control, shows how vulnerable we all are. Empathy is the first step in understanding ontological fear. It forces us to face how fragile identity is and asks what keeps us together when the world around us seems unstable. Moral nihilism. What if good, evil, right and wrong weren't universal facts but rather things that people made up? Stories we made up to bring order to a wild universe? If you believe in moral nihilism, you say that morality isn't real, but just a story we tell ourselves. People who believe in moral nihilism, like J.L. Mackie, start their work ethics, inventing right and wrong with the bold claim that there are no objective values. Mackie doesn't see moral claims like justice, kindness, and violence as facts about the world. They are instead reflections of human feelings and social norms, just like shadows on a wall are not real. Mackie gives 2 reasons to back this point of view. The first is based on the theory of relativity. Moral rules are very different between societies and times. What is good in one society is bad in another. What if morality was really objective? Shouldn't it be more consistent? Mackie says that these differences don't come from universal truths, but from the way people's wants change depending on the situation. The second is the case from being gay or lesbian. Objective moral values would be unlike anything else in the world. They would be strange metaphysical forces that tell people how to act. How could we even find things like that? For Mackie, this idea doesn't make sense, which weakens the idea of objective morals even more. However, moral nihilism does not call for chaos or breaking the law. Mackie says that morality is a useful lie. It's not that rules like stealing is wrong are cosmic facts. They're just ways to keep society stable. Even though it's not true, the story works. Cosmic horror. The world is very big, doesn't care about anything, and is hard to understand. There are a lot of stars that we can't see, because their light has been lost in the void. This endless quiet is where cosmic horror lives. This is an existential fear that comes from the fact that we are not important in a universe that doesn't know or care about us. When H.P. Lovecraft wrote, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown," he said it best. Fear of monsters isn't what this is. This is fear of learning that the world we know floats in a deep hole, and is controlled by forces beyond our understanding. Cosmic fear is based on the idea that people's minds aren't smart enough to understand the real nature of things. What does morality or meaning mean if the world is not consistent? There is cosmic horror in this uncertainty because it forces us to face facts that might break our understanding. Like an ant on a smartphone, it can only see what's on the outside and can't see the complicated systems below. Negative utilitarianism says that everyone feels pain. No matter who you are, pain cuts deeper than happiness ever could. Negative utilitarianism forces us to face a scary question. If the goal of ethics is to lessen suffering, then shouldn't getting rid of pain come before making people happy? Karl Popper wrote about this idea in his book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. Suffering makes a direct moral appeal for help, while there is no similar call to increase the happiness of a man who is not suffering. POA thinks that ending suffering is not only important, it's also ethically necessary. Utilitarianism tries to make everyone happy and healthy. Negative utilitarianism builds on this idea. But unlike traditional utilitarianism, it puts stopping harm ahead of making people happy. It's easy to see why. Pain is more powerful than joy. Joy can make a moment better, but pain, especially intense or long-lasting pain, can take over a life. Not many people would trade constant pain for short-lived happiness. There is, however, disagreement about this philosophy. Some critics point out how disturbing it is. If ending pain is the most important thing, wouldn't getting rid of all living things that can feel be the best way to do it? In the end, there is no pain where there is no life. David Pearce, a philosopher who believes in negative utilitarianism, offers a less extreme way to solve the problem. Use science and technology to get rid of suffering, and imagine a future where pain is no longer needed. Even though it comes to harsh conclusions, negative utilitarianism is a very important moral challenge. Shouldn't lowering pain be more important than seeking happiness in a world full of avoidable suffering, like hunger, disease, and war? It makes us think, what if the real measure of morals isn't how much happiness we bring into the world, but how much pain we stop? And isn't that the most important part of life? There's a chance that everything you've ever done, from what you ate for breakfast to who you are now, wasn't really a choice. Determinism says that everything we do, think, and experience is caused by things that happened in the past. This means that freedom is just a dream. The idea comes from ancient philosophy, but Pierre-Simon Lasse, a mathematician in the 18th century, really got to the heart of it with his idea of Ellul's demon. This made-up intelligence could know for sure what would happen in the future because it knew where and how every particle in the universe was moving. Laplace wrote that such a mind would know everything, and the future and past would both be right in front of it. Cause and reaction are what determinism is based on. Every action, from the movement of atoms to the firing of neurons, is limited by what has happened before. Every thought and deed would still happen the same way if time went backwards, because you never really had control over them. As the story goes, what's the point of it all? You work hard every day, but tomorrow you have to deal with the same problems. For Albert Camus, this L repetition is like the story of Copus, who was forced to roll a rock up a hill over and over again, but each time it went back down. There is no point to the story, but Camus saw it as a fitting metaphor for the human condition. Camus asks the most important question in his article, The Myth of Copus. Is life worth living? If life doesn't have any meaning on its own, then existence is meaningless. Camus says that the absurd comes from the clash between our search for meaning and the universe's lack of interest. But instead of being hopeless, Camus finds freedom. He writes that the fight to reach the top is enough to make a man happy. Copus seems stuck because he keeps working hard without any hope of success. But Camus takes back his story by accepting the absurd, or admitting that his job has no point. Cis goes beyond his penalty. The gods decide what will happen to him, but not what he does. Camus comes to the conclusion that Coppus must be happy because he finds freedom in his rebellion. Camus' philosophy isn't about giving up. It's about living fully, even when things go wrong. He disagrees with both nihilism and false hope, saying that the fact that life doesn't have a purpose makes it more valuable. Every moment is a chance to give our lives purpose, not because the universe makes it so, but because we choose to. We all have our own endless cycles, just like Coppus. But for Camus, it's not the job that makes us who we are, but how we approach it. We find freedom in the climb. Animal sacrifice in Theodicy. If God is good and strong, then why does innocent people suffer? This is especially true for animals that can't do anything wrong. This question, which is at the heart of Theodicy's study of animal pain, makes religious and philosophical ideas hard to understand. Predators, diseases, hunger, and natural tragedies have been hurting animals for millions of years. They can't make sense of or find meaning in their pain like people can. If this pain has no point, why would a good God let it happen? William Rowe famously used the four in the forest thought experiment to show this. A four gets caught in a blaze and suffers a lot before dying by itself. Rowe asks, what's the point of this? If there isn't one, this kind of pain calls into question the idea of an all-good God. Theists have come up with different theodicies to explain how pain can fit with God's kindness. The better good defense says that animals' pain is part of a bigger plan by God. Pain and predation keep ecosystems in balance, which makes things more complicated. Others use the free will defense, saying that the unpredictable nature of the natural world is important for human freedom. However, animals don't have moral agency, which makes this explanation less clear. John Hick said that pain was necessary for making the soul and for moral and spiritual growth. But what spiritual progress is there for a gazelle that a lion eats or a bird that has parasites? Critics like David Atfield say these kinds of arguments don't work. Animal pain seems unnecessary, excessive, and not necessary. The theory of terror management says that the fear of death can affect everything you do and everything you believe. Terror management theory shows how being aware of our own death changes how we think, what we do, and even society itself. The idea was created in the 1980s by psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pisinski. It is based on Ernest Becker's book, The Denial of Death. Becker said that because humans are so aware of their own death, we face an eternal terror that could stop us in our tracks. To deal with things, people make meaning systems like religion, art, and politics that give their lives meaning and help them feel connected to something bigger. These cultural worldviews protect us from the scary truth that we will die one day. This protection does cost something, though. When our beliefs are questioned, our fear of death comes back. Researchers have found that small reminders of death, which psychologists call mortality salience, can have a big effect on behavior. It makes people more protective of their cultural values, less open to different ideas, and even hostile toward those who challenge their views. People who were reminded of death were more likely to back charismatic leaders who said they would make things stronger and more stable. This fear shapes not only people, but also whole societies. Our monuments, customs, and rituals aren't just pieces of culture. They protect us from death's shadow and give us a sense of stability. Self-bundle theory. Who are you? Is there a core you that lies beneath your ideas and actions? David Hume was a philosopher who didn't agree. Hume came up with the revolutionary bundle theory of the self in his treatise on nature. This theory makes us think about who we are. Hume said that when we look inside ourselves, we don't find a single, stable self. Instead, we experience a stream of perceptions, sensations, thoughts, and feelings that are always changing. He wrote, "Whenever I get really close to what I call myself, I always come across a certain perception. I can never catch myself without a perception, and I can never look at something other than a perception." Hume said that the self is not a single thing, but a bundle of events that are only loosely linked together, like beads on a string. There is no string, though. The mind's need for consistency makes the self seem like more than the sum of its parts. Think of a video reel. The frames blur together to make it look like the video is moving, but if you stop it, you'll see separate pictures. Hume said that our sense of self is the same way. It's something we make up in our minds, not a real thing. Identity, duty, and morality are all put to the test by this. If there is no core self, then who is responsible for what we do? Some critics, like Immanuel Kant, said that organizing views needs a stable self. Others say that consistency is created by memory and story. But current neuroscience backs up Hume. Studies show that the brain is made up of many systems that work together without a central controller. It looks like the self is a process, not a thing. An interesting idea from Hume's theory gives us freedom. If we're made up of experiences, then we can change and grow with each passing moment. The problem of other minds. How do you know if someone else is aware? Not only alive, but really awake, thinking, feeling, and living in the world like you? What if your best friend, your family, or even people you don't know on the street are just acting like people without being aware of it? In philosophy, this is known as the problem of other minds, and there is no clear answer to it. The problem comes from the fact that awareness is subjective. You know you're aware because your feelings and thoughts are real to you. But when it comes to other people, you only watch how they act. A smile or tears may show that someone is happy or sad. But are these really signs of how they're feeling? Or are they just ways of showing what they're feeling? How can you be sure that other people aren't mental zombies, which are things that act like they're aware but aren't really? René Descartes reportedly said, "I think, therefore I am," which proved that he was conscious. He was sure about some things, but not about others. This left their thoughts open to question. Brain activity is mapped today and linked to thoughts and feelings, but this doesn't give us access to someone else's emotional experience. We can measure how the brain works, but not what's going on inside it. The scary part is that no one can prove you are aware, just like you can't prove others are. From their point of view, you could be the robot that is just going through the steps without thinking about it. This question makes us think about our morals, our connections, and our ability to understand others. We act like other people are aware, though, because the alternative, a world where your mind is the only reality, is too horrible to think about. Causa Sui. What if something could make itself, or exist without a reason from outside it? Being your own cause is what Causa Sui means. It goes against common sense and makes us rethink what it means to live. Baruch Spinoza came up with the idea and used it to talk about God, or, as he called it, substance. Spinoza wrote in his book on ethics that something is free if it exists because of its own nature and is driven to act on its own. Spinoza thought that God or the universe was Causa Sui, which means it was unique, had no limits, and didn't rely on anything else. This idea goes against what we know about how causes work. Nothing stands alone. A tree grows from a seed, and a seed grows from another tree. But where does the link start? Spinoza's answer is very different. It involves something that just exists and is the cause, so it doesn't need a cause. Causa also makes sense in the field of psychological philosophy. Some thinkers, like SRA, looked into the human desire to make oneself. It was what SRA called the project of being God, or the longing to define ourselves without outside influence. People can't really be Causa Sui, but the fight to define ourselves shapes our lives. When scientists ask about the beginning of the universe they hear echoes of Causa Sui. It's said that everything has a cause. So what caused the universe? Could it make itself? Or does it need a first cause from outside? Spinoza thinks that the world just exists, without a reason. The point of this idea is not to get away from cause, but to understand it. Causa Sui makes us think about a paradox. Can something really cause itself? Or is it just our desire to escape the web of causes that define us? Beginning to die. You are dying right now, not someday in the far future. Every second, every breath brings you closer to the end. Martin Heidegger's idea of being toward death is based on this stark truth. For Hegel, death isn't just an event. It's what makes us human and shapes how we live every day. Being sure of death and not knowing it at the same time is a paradox. Hegel wrote, "As soon as man comes to life, he is old enough to die." He meant to stress that death is always with us and a part of who we are. But its nature and timing are still a secret, which makes it unlike anything else. Most of us try to escape this truth by getting caught up in habits and social norms, which Heidegger called the they self. When we're in this passive state, we give ourselves the illusion of longevity by acting like death is far away and vague. But Heidegger said that this delay makes life less real. To live an honest life, we have to face our death head-on. Hegel called this state of being toward death, which means consciously recognizing that life is limited. We are responsible for our lives when we accept death. It becomes more important to make choices, and life stops being a set of passive motions. Hegel doesn't see this as hopelessness. They see it as freedom. Knowing that time is limited makes it valuable. You stop living for other people or pointless things and start living for yourself, knowing that your life is short. Hegel thought that death was the best thing that could happen to a person. No one else can die in your place. When you face this fact, you let go of illusions and live a real life, understanding that the value of life lies in its uncertainty. He said that we can only really live when we face death. Think about the ironic process theory. Most likely a white bear was the first thing that came to mind. Daniel Wagner came up with the idea of ironic process theory in the 1980s. It is based on this paradox. It shows a strange thing about the mind. The more we try to push a thought away, the more likely it is to come back. But why does this take place? The mind breaks into two parts when we push a thought away. Don't think about the white bear is an example of the first process. The second process, which is unconscious, looks for the thought to make sure it doesn't get through. In a strange way, this watching keeps the thought alive and ready to come back to the surface. Wagner did tests where people were told not to think about a white bear, and this happened. The thought came up more often the harder they tried. This isn't just a brain quirk. It has effects on the real world. People with insomnia who try to ignore their worries often wake up very early. Eaters are obsessed with the things they can't eat. Breakups last a long time because attempting to forget an ex makes them stand out even more. Wagner suggested a way out. Get distracted. By shifting your attention to something else, like a black cat, you can weaken the unwanted thought. It's also helpful to let your ideas go instead of fighting them, like watching clouds move across the sky. What did you learn? Suppression makes fixation worse. Let the thought come and go instead of fighting it, because it gets stronger the more you try to beat it, like a stubborn white bear. Moral desert. Do we earn anything at all? Moral desert is the idea that people don't always deserve the awards or punishments they get. If you do something good, you should get good results. And if you do something bad, you should get bad results. But if you look more closely, this idea starts to fall apart. Philosophers like John Rawls say that a lot of what we think is fair rests on things we can't change. As Rawls says in A Theory of Justice, things like intelligence, talent, and even moral character are formed by luck, our genes, and the place where we grow up. If these important parts of who we are weren't decided, how can we say we deserve anything? For instance, Someone who was born into money may work hard and become successful, but their chances came from benefits they didn't earn. On the other hand, someone who is born poor may still have trouble even if they work just as hard or even harder. In a moral desert, everyone has the same chances. But in real life, that doesn't always happen. Bernard Williams goes even further and says that morals shouldn't be about rewarding or punishing people, but about making systems that are fair and good for everyone. For him, the idea of deservingness is just another way to talk about injustice instead of fixing it. Determinism makes things even more difficult. How much power do we really have if our actions are shaped by biology, environment, and experience? Do people really deserve their fate if free will is a myth? This argument has effects on the real world. Meritocracies say they reward hard work, but is this fair if hard work depends on unfair conditions? And in criminal justice, punishing people based on desert doesn't take into account how the system works, which affects behavior. Two-part mind. What if our minds are much younger than we think? Julian James wrote about the bicameral mind theory in his 1976 book, The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. It is a big idea. James said that people from up to 3,000 years ago were not as aware of their surroundings as we are now. Instead, they had two chambers in their minds. One gave orders, and the other followed them, thinking the orders came from gods. James talked about works like the Iliad, where characters don't think for themselves and make choices based on voices from heaven. He thought these weren't metaphors, but real events, where one side of the brain gave orders and the other side heard them. This two-part mind gave clear, powerful instructions that were needed to stay alive in early societies that were very chaotic. After some time, this method fell apart because of the growth of society and written language. As outside forces like wars and movements got stronger, humans learned to adapt. This led to more self-reflection and the development of modern self-awareness. For James, this was the start of awareness as we know it today. Some people have called the theory speculative and questioned its neurological basis and reliance on literary interpretation. But James's ideas make me think about big questions, like, is modern awareness a fairly new thing that has been shaped by history? Could it be less stable and certain than we think? If social and environmental pressures caused awareness to appear in the first place, could they also make it go away in other situations? James's theory makes us think about whether our sense of self is something that all people have, or something that only exists at one point in time. Leave out governments, laws, and social norms. What's left? This is state of nature as war. Thomas Hobbes, a philosopher, saw it as chaos, a terrible war between all men. Hobbes thought that this state of nature, a world without government, was the real world for people. Hobbes wrote Leviathan in 1651, in which he said that fear and struggle would rule life in the state of nature. People would fight endlessly over wealth and power because they are selfish and want to stay alive. He wrote that, when things are like this, man's life is lonely, poor, mean, hard, and short. Why is there so much chaos? Hobbes brought up the kind of equality that makes everyone equally dangerous, not the good kind. Through strategy or partnerships, even the weakest can hurt the strongest, which leads to constant mistrust. People would always be suspicious and ready to attack if there were no rules or power to keep them safe. It's not just an idea. Hobbes said that civil wars and the breakdown of society were signs of the state of nature. It's just that he didn't think people were bad. To stay alive in a world without order, you have to fight before it happens. Hobbes thought that the only way out was through the social contract, which meant that people would give up some of their freedom to a powerful authority, the Leviathan, in exchange for safety and peace. The chaos of the state of nature is kept in check by this authority, which has complete power. Some people say Hobbes didn't take into account how cooperative people are, but his ideas are still relevant today, especially in times of political instability and foreign tension. What's at stake is shown by the shade of the state of nature. Hobbes wants us to think about what really holds society together and how far we're willing to go to protect it. What happens when someone is not given information because of what they say, but because of who they are? This is what epistemic unfairness is all about, a term Miranda Frere came up with. It talks about how bias, prejudice, or systemic power imbalances can make some opinions not be heard or given enough weight. Not only is it wrong, but it also goes against their duty to help everyone understand. Frere points out two main types. When stereotypes hurt someone's trustworthiness, this is called testimonial injustice. For instance, a woman may bring up an idea at work that is ignored until a guy says it again. Not what she knows is being questioned, but who she is. The second kind, called hermeneutical injustice, happens when people don't have the words to describe certain events. Before words like sexual harassment were widely used, women didn't have a good way to describe or fight their situations. Not because they weren't smart, but because they didn't have any social rules to follow. Systemic injustices like these keep marginalized views quiet and keep power imbalances strong over time. They keep some groups from shaping information and truth, which keeps inequality going. Frere says, the epistemic injustice done to someone as a knower is both unique and destructive. This kind of injustice not only hurts people, but it also hurts society by limiting the points of view we hear. To fight this, Frere promotes epistemic virtue, which means listening without bias, being aware of bias, and valuing different opinions. It's not simple, but the only way to make society fair is to do it. That Flynn thing makes me wonder if we're really getting smarter or just better at tests. The Flynn Effect is based on this question. It was called after James Flynn, who found that IQ scores have been going up over the past 100 years. Flynn found that average scores have gone up by 3 points every 10 years. This means that a person with an average IQ in the 1930s would have a score much lower than the average today. But the rise isn't happening everywhere. It's most obvious in problem solving and abstract reasoning, not in math or general knowledge. It's too fast for evolution, Flynn said, so this trend can't be genetic. Instead, it shows how the world has changed. In the 20th century, there were changes in schooling, jobs that required problem solving, and even how we use technology, like smartphones and video games. These things help our brains learn how to think in ways that IQ tests measure. But does this really mean we're smarter? Some critics say that rising scores might just mean that people are getting better at the test style, and not that their minds are really getting smarter. Ulrich Neisser, a psychologist, said that IQ tests only measure certain types of intelligence, like reasoning and pattern recognition, and not other types, like creativity or emotional understanding. Some people are also worried that this trend might change. New studies show that the Flynn effect is stopping or going down in some areas. This could be because of changes in lifestyle, rising inequality, and inadequate funding for education. Can an all-powerful being make a rock that is so heavy that not even they can lift it? This silly question brings up the Omnipotence Paradox, a problem that makes you question the idea of having unlimited power. Usually, omnipotence means being able to do anything. But the paradox shows that if an all-powerful being can make such a rock, they can't lift it, so they are not all-powerful. Their power is still limited if they can't make it. Omnipotence seems to be weakening in either case. Thomas Aquinas and other medieval thinkers talked about this problem and said that omnipotence does not mean being able to do things that make no sense. In Summa Theologica, Aquinas said that contradictions, like a circle that is square or a rock that can't be moved, don't represent limits on power. He thinks that power means being able to do anything that makes sense. René Descartes was more extreme. He said that an all-powerful being might be able to go beyond even reasoning. As Descartes put it, if God wanted 2 plus 2 to equal 5, it would be. But this reading worries a lot of people because it makes omnipotence impossible to understand and bends the very fabric of reason. The omnipotent paradox is not just a religious problem. It also raises questions about the idea of unlimited power. Can an all-powerful being make the world they can't control or end their own life? These questions show how limited words and our ability to understand each other are. Moral tree. Why do we call some things good and others evil? Are these universal facts or ideas that have grown out of history? Friedrich Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals makes us question what we think we know about morals by linking its roots to power struggles and changes in culture. Nietzsche says that morality is not eternal or holy, but something that has grown over time. He says there are 2 kinds of morals: slave morality and master morality. Strong, powerful, and healthy people were respected by master morality, which comes from ancient aristocratic societies. For those in power, good meant the traits they had, and bad meant being weak or average. On the other hand, slave morals came from the anger of those who were mistreated. Because they didn't have enough power, they changed the rules of morals by saying that strength was bad, and traits like suffering and humility were good. Nietzsche calls this a revaluation of values, which means that the elite moral code is being turned upside down. He says that this morality was written down in Christianity, which praised pain and promised rewards to those who were mild. Nietzsche thought that this moral framework was used by the weak to hurt the strong. Even though it was new and different at the time, Nietzsche says that slave morality now limits people's abilities by encouraging uniformity over individuality. He creates the Übermensch, or Overman, a character who goes beyond standard morality to make new values that are good for life. Nietzsche doesn't hate humanity, but he does want us to think about values we've been taught. Where do our ideas about what is good and bad come from? Do they give us power or hold us back? The Sublime. When you stand on the edge of a cliff and look out into the storm-tossed ocean, you feel a deep sense of awe and fear that is hard to put into words. This is the sublime, an idea that has interested artists and thinkers for hundreds of years, looking at where beauty, terror, and human understanding meet. The sublime isn't just respect or pleasure. It's about how big something is. In his book, A Philosophical Inquiry, Edmund Burke defined the sublime as amazement with some degree of horror. For Burke, the sublime happens when large, uncontrollable forces are present, like the power of nature, endless space, or the fact that death is inevitable. In Critique of Judgment, Immanuel Kant added to this by saying that the sublime isn't just something you see, it's also something you feel in your mind. When we see the vastness of a bright sky or tall mountains, we feel small, but we also know that we can understand such vastness. The sublime is this strain between being unimportant and having a lot of knowledge. When beauty meets danger, the sublime comes out. A calm lake might be lovely, but a booming waterfall with its loud noise and huge drop is truly magnificent. It's the thrill of being close to something that could kill you and still being amazed that it exists. This feeling is shown in art and writing. Romantic poets like Wordsworth and painters like Caspar David Friedrich tried to capture the essence of the sublime, which reminds us of forces bigger than ourselves. These days, we see it in pictures of galaxies far away or in the raw power of storms. The sublime pushes us to accept what we don't know, to find meaning in the tension between fear and wonder, and to see how small we are and how amazing it is that we can see it. The Hedonism Paradox. The more you try to find happiness, the farther away it gets. This is the paradox of hedonism, an idea that shows how wrong it is to directly seek happiness. Trying to get pleasure is less likely to happen the more we think about it as a goal. If you want to be happy, you have to do other things first. Happiness just happens on its own. In his book Methods of Ethics, philosopher Henry Sidgwick made this idea more well known by saying that focusing too much on happiness often backfires. He wrote, "The impulse toward pleasure, if too predominant, defeats its own aim. Focusing on happiness makes small problems worse, which makes it harder to be happy. Being involved in things other than ourselves makes us happy." This paradox is supported by modern science. Researchers have found that people who put important goals first, like helping others, getting better at a skill, or taking care of relationships, are happier than those who just want to have fun. Philosopher John Stuart Mill agreed, saying, "Those only are happy who have their minds set on something other than their own happiness." What's the point of this paradox? To be happy, you need to have a reason and be involved. When you only care about yourself, your life feels empty. But when you strive for something bigger, you often find joy in surprising places. The Grand Inquisitor. What if people don't really want freedom? What if they want comfort, safety, and the appearance of choice? This scary question is at the heart of The Grand Inquisitor, a story from The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It makes us think about what we think we know about faith, power, and people. During the Inquisition in Spain in the 1600s, Christ comes back. People know him and are glad to see how kind he is, but the church arrests him because they are afraid he will challenge their authority. That night, the Grand Inquisitor goes to see Christ in his cell, but not to praise him, but to punish him. The Inquisitor says that Christ gave people freedom, which is too much for them to handle. He says, "You wanted to set them free, but they are weak and afraid." He says that people don't want the duty of choice because it brings only fear and pain. They want leaders who can give them peace of mind, even if it means giving up their freedom. He says that the church has taken away freedom in return for happiness, which is something that Christ would not have done. He says, "We will feed them, but we will also make them work for us." Christ just hears and doesn't say anything to defend himself. He just kisses the Inquisitor and leaves at the end. It's not clear whether this action means forgiveness, rebuke, or understanding. The story shows how freedom and safety are at odds with each other. Can we really accept that we have free will, or do we always give it up for comfort? Dostoevsky doesn't give any answers. He just asks a troubling question. If we have the choice between freedom and ease, which do we pick? What does that choice say about us? The illusion of free will. You think you can choose what to eat, what to say, and even which way to go. But what if that sense of power isn't real? What if free will, which is what makes us human, is just a story your brain tells you after the fact? Baruch Spinoza, a philosopher, said that people are like stones moving downhill. He thought that people control their own motion because they don't know what forces are pushing them. He wrote, "Men think themselves free because they are aware of their actions but ignorant of the causes." Hundreds of years later, tests by neuroscientist Benjamin Libet showed that our brains start getting ready for actions milliseconds before we are aware that we are going to do them. Even though it may feel like you chose to grab a glass of water, your brain already made the choice. Some modern thinkers, like Sam Harris, say that every choice we make is based on factors like our genes, our surroundings, and unconscious processes that we can't control. He says, "You can do what you decide to do, but you cannot decide what you will decide to do." Even the act of thinking about something is affected by things we are not aware of. Some people think that rejecting free will makes people less responsible, but Harris says that it changes the focus from blaming to understanding, asking why someone did what they did and how suffering can be avoided. The is-ought problem. What if everything you think about right and wrong is based on a leap from facts to values that reasoning can't support? This is the is-ought problem, which was first raised by David Hume in the 18th century as a challenge to moral thinking. Hume wrote about this in a treatise of human nature. He said that moral arguments often start with how the world is, facts, natural rules, and then jump to how the world should be, what we should do or value. He said that this leap is not reasonable. There is no logical link between words that describe things and moral rules that tell people what to do. Take the argument. Humans evolved to compete for resources, so we should put our own needs first. The first part is true, but the second part is moral. Why then should the fact that we evolved this way tell us how to behave? Hume said that this shift brings in ideas that haven't been thought through. Now we have to think. If not from facts, then where do morals come from? Some say morality is objective, like mathematical truths, while others say it's a creation of people that is shaped by culture and feeling. People also argue about science and morals when they talk about the is-ought problem. Some people, like Sam Harris, say that science can help lead morality by showing what is good for people. Some people say that even this assumes a value, which is that well-being is valuable and can't be proven by science. Hume thought that moral decisions are based on feelings, not on reasoning. Reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions, he wrote. What if you didn't know when you were being watched, but you knew you were? Would you do something different? This is what Panopticism is all about, which is an idea that psychologist Michel Foucault wrote about in her book, Discipline and Punish. It shows how the chance of being watched changes behavior and makes control possible in places other than physical walls. The prison concept, by Jeremy Bentham, called the Panopticon, gave Foucault ideas. The design was a circle with cells forming a ring around a center watchtower. Guards could watch inmates without being seen, which made them aware of always being seen. The genius wasn't watching the prisoners all the time, but making them think they were always being watched. Foucault made this into a figure of speech for current power. He said that panopticism isn't about real surveillance, but about being afraid of it. People control themselves just because they might be watched, which turns spying into self-discipline. Foucault wrote that a real subjection automatically comes from a made-up connection. This idea is everywhere in modern life, from security cameras and job monitoring to social media. Do you post to say what you want or to change how other people see you? Panopticism changes the balance of power from outside regulation to internal compliance. It's not just about technology either. Observation and grouping are tools that schools, hospitals, and states use to change how people act. Foucault said that in modern times, punishments have changed from physical to subtle but effective psychic control. Panopticism makes us think about important things, like how much of our freedom is just a fiction. Who and why are they watching? Being aware of this situation gives you a chance to fight back. Being watched isn't what gives panopticism its power. Thinking we are is. Realizing this is the first step to taking back control. Fallenness of Dasein. We scroll through life, looking for short-lived joys and following routines. But is this really alive? Martin Heidegger called this the fallenness of Dasein, and it shows a scary truth about being human. A lot of the things we do keep us from facing who we really are. In Being and Time, Heidegger introduces the idea of Dasein, which means being there or existence. Dasein is what it means to be human, to be able to question life and look for meaning. But instead of facing these deep questions, we give up and become what Heidegger called fallen, or passively interested in the small and obvious. Being fallen isn't a moral state, it's a psychological one. Heidegger says it's like getting lost in the they and having social norms and expectations run our lives. We lose touch with who we really are when we think, say, and act like they. We create perfect online personas, follow trends without thinking about how useful they are, and fill our days with things that keep us from facing the real truths. Fallenness is a way to get away from stress. Heidegger thinks that anxiety is more than just fear. It's the troubling knowledge that we can make our lives however we want without a set goal. This understanding shows us the empty space at the center of everything. We avoid the discomfort of being real by slipping back into routine and convention instead of welcoming this freedom. The paradox of worry is that it can free us. Heidegger thought it could wake us up from our sins by making us face our limitedness and take responsibility for the choices we make. To be authentic, we don't have to reject society. We just have to be clear about our own purpose. God is dead, Nietzsche said in The Gay Science, which was a scary statement that meant the end of divine power and the freedom of people. What if God isn't really gone, though? What if God is still around but not alive? What if God is an undead presence that is a part of our society, our morals, and our minds? This is the idea of the undead God, a God who has died, but still haunts our beliefs and institutions. Nietzsche wasn't telling us about the dangers of clinging to beliefs we've given up, but about the dangers of atheism winning. He thought that people were stuck in the ruins of old structures and didn't want to face the empty space that was left behind. He asked, "What are these morals if they are not the light of God?" Shadows of shadows. The problem is very clear. What gives ideas like good and evil, justice, and freedom their meaning without God? N said that these standards, which used to be based on divine command, are now loose and can't be tied down. Even though we don't believe in religious authority, we accept these values as holy truths, even though they are based on weak evidence. Unsettling facts can be found in modern life. People believe that morality and equality are obvious facts, but they have theological roots that we no longer accept. Even though we deny it exists, the dead God still shapes our world. Nature not only saw the problem, he told us what to do about it. He told us to kill the undead God by rethinking our values and making new ones that aren't based on old beliefs. This is how the Mensch find meaning in a world where there are no absolutes. Are you living in the shadow of a dead God? Or are you ready to face the void and make new meaning? The specter of nature dares us. The choice is yours. Vanity of Existence. Why do we work so hard when we know that nothing lasts? The idea of the vanity of existence, which Arthur Schopenhauer put forward as a stark comment on the pointlessness of life, is based on this. Schopenhauer thought that life was a never-ending cycle of striving, pain, and falling apart. As he wrote, "The vanity of existence is shown in the whole form it takes, in the contrast between the infiniteness of time and space and the finiteness of the individual. It seems like we are temporary beings lost in an endless, heartless universe in both." Friedrich Schopenhauer said that the will to life is what drives us to live, reproduce, and chase our desires. But every wish that comes true only makes room for new ones. He said that all satisfaction is bad because it takes away a wish and its pain. This never-ending longing is like Camus, pushing his rock uphill over and over again. In everyday life, this truth becomes clear. A new accomplishment, possession, or praise makes us happy for a short time. But the happiness fades quickly, leaving us wanting more. Even things that are made, like love or leaving a legacy, Schopenhauer saw as efforts to hide the void. All accomplishments are worn down over time. Even the biggest powers fall apart. He wrote that what was and is no longer always looks better than what is now. He didn't want to be hopeless. He wanted to be clear. He thought that realizing how pointless life was helped us avoid it through art, philosophy, and especially music, which he said gave us moments of freedom from the never-ending struggle. Apophatic theology says that God can only be denied, not explained. This is what apophatic theology, also called negative theology, is based on. The idea that any effort to describe God is flawed by nature. Not because the statements aren't true, but because words can't fully express how infinite and beyond our understanding the divine is. Pseudo-Dionys, the Areopagite, an early Christian thinker, wrote that the greatest thing is neither light nor darkness, nor truth nor lies. This idea comes from him. It goes beyond all claims and denials. He said that in order to understand God, we must first forget everything we think we know. Positive statements about God, like God is good or God is loving, are not accepted by apophatic theology. This is because, according to this view, these statements reduce God to human terms and limit our knowledge of the divine. Instead, it focuses on what God is not: limited, made of matter, time-bound, or easy to understand. Looking at it is like looking at the sun. You can't see how bright it is, but you can feel its power. This way of doing things is unsettling because it takes away confidence. How can we pray, worship, or grow in our faith if we can't know God? Some philosophers say that the mystery is what it's all about. We can have a more reverent view of the divine if we accept what we don't know. Unlike cataphatic theology, which uses positive qualities to describe God, apophatic theology says that this is not enough. One wise man named Meister Eckhart said that God is bigger than God. The Last Man. Have you ever thought about what the end of the world might look like if it wasn't chaotic? A world where there is no longer any desire, greatness, or meaning. Friedrich Nietzsche first talks about the idea of the last man in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. There is no end in sight. This is a picture of spiritual stagnation. The last man stands for a society that puts safety and comfort above all else, and gives up on trying to be great. He gives up the search for meaning in favor of simple joys, and is happy with his life as it is. The last man says, "We have made happiness, but it's hollow, a life without dreams, risks, or goals, and a constant attempt to avoid being uncomfortable." He doesn't ask deep questions or look for a greater purpose. He's happy just existing and doesn't want to live a life with challenges or depth. Nietzsche's Übermensch, or Overman, on the other hand, welcomes chaos and struggle, making his own values and going beyond mediocrity. The Overman sees life as a chance to be creative and grow, but the last man only sees it as a way to stay alive and do the same things over and over again. Nietzsche's advice is still relevant today. The need for comfort, the never-ending search for distractions, and the fear of failing all show the very tendency away from meaning that he was afraid of. The last man is not bad or spiteful. He is just tired of trying, asking questions, and not giving up. He stands for the quiet decline of humanity into irrelevance, where mediocrity has replaced aspiration. Master-slave dialectic. Every interaction is a fight to be seen. One of Guts Friedrich Hegel's deepest thoughts from Phenomenology of Spirit is the master-slave dialectic. This is what it means at its core. Plus, it's about power, dependence, and the need to be seen, not just being in charge. Hegel starts with two people talking. Each needs the other to recognize their existence in order to feel like they have a self. This leads to conflict, a fight for respect that could end in death. The end result: one person is made the boss, and the other person is made the slave. At first, it looks like the owner won because he is giving orders and the slave is following them. But Hegel shows a paradox. The master's power is empty because it depends on the slave recognizing it. Hegel says that the slave's work is what brings about real change. The slave learns more about himself or herself and about truth by changing the material world. The slave becomes aware of what he is through work, as Hegel writes. This dialogue isn't just about real-life masters and slaves. It's a metaphor for how power works in all human relationships, from feudal systems in the past to economic and social hierarchies today. It's also very personal, as shown by the relationships between bosses and workers, parents and kids, and even lovers. What Hegel shows is that recognition isn't always equal. But Hegel's idea goes even further. He says that true acceptance comes from both sides agreeing with each other, not from dominance. It's a fine line where both people acknowledge that the other is equal. The Gnostic Demiurge. What if the world you see, everything you think is real, was not made by a good divine builder, but by a flawed, evil one? This being is called the Demiurge in Gnostic philosophy. It is a lesser god who is ignorant and proud. Instead of being an all-good god, like many religions believe in, the Gnostics saw the Demiurge as a blind artist who made the world not out of perfection, but out of mistake. They thought that this flawed work was a jail where souls were locked up and made to suffer. The word Demiurge comes from the Greek word demiurgos, which means craftsman. Plato used it to talk about a god who organized chaos, but the Gnostics saw the Demiurge as a false god. The Demiurge, whose name is Yaldeo, is portrayed in works like the Apocryphon of John as a terrifying being who says, "I am God, and there is no other." The Gnostics believed that the true core of God is beyond this broken world, in a pure spiritual realm. Gnostics thought that each person has a heavenly spark, a piece of the true God, trapped in the Demiurge's work. Salvation, they claimed, isn't found in obeying this false god, or perfecting life within his flawed world. Instead, it comes through gnosis, spiritual awakening. By recognizing the cosmic illusion and reclaiming the divine spark, one can achieve freedom. The Demiurge's story resonates today. Philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer and sci-fi narratives like The Matrix explore similar ideas of a flawed or controlled world. The Gnostics leave us with a scary question. Are we brave enough to face this world as a dream and look for what lies beyond? Values. Reevaluation. What if the values you hold dear, like goodness, humility, and kindness, weren't meant to make you feel better, but to control you? Friedrich Nietzsche said this had already happened and called for a radical rethinking of morality and values. N talked about two kinds of morality in Thus Spoke Zarathustra and the Antichrist. These are master morality and slave morality. Master morality, which comes from old aristocratic societies, praised strength, vitality, and success. Being good meant being strong, and being bad meant being weak. But, he said, history showed a dramatic change. The abused, whom N called slaves, got rid of their leaders by making up a new set of morals. It was decided that ambition, control, and self-assertion were bad things, and humility, meekness, and self-denial were good. N called this change of heart an act of ressentiment, which means a moral code that comes from anger. N thought that this limited people's possibilities. Slave morality, which was rooted in Christianity and modern ethics, stifled people's natural urges to be creative and celebrate life. He wrote that man would rather will nothing than not will anything at all, which was a criticism of how guilt and submission had taken the place of energy and self-overcoming. Ness's answer? A change in the way values are judged, a whole new understanding of what is moral. He thought of the Übermensch, or Overman, as a person who makes their own morals and isn't limited by those they were born with. There was no call for cruelty or tyranny. There was a rejection of morality that values weakness over power. Will to power. What drives us? Friedrich Nietzsche thought the answer was simple: the desire for power. Every action, goal, and desire is driven by this basic force: the need to not only live, but also to assert, overcome, and create. In a simple sense, the will to power isn't about dominance. It goes deeper than money or power. N saw it as life itself, a force that drives all living things to grow and try to be in charge. He says in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "Where I found the living, there I found the will to power." This drive is what makes life possible, from plants reaching for sunshine to the greatest things people have ever done. N's will to power changes over time, unlike Darwin's survival of the fittest. Survival is just living. The will to power changes over time. It tries to go beyond limits, give meaning to chaos, and push the limits. It makes us more creative, driven, and even angry. N thought that this drive was the source of the force that changes things in life. But the will to power isn't just outside, it's also inside people. To become the Übermensch, or Overman, N thought that he had to master himself. The Übermensch go beyond social norms and make up their own rules. He wrote that the highest will to power is to force becoming to take on the shape of being. Some critics have taken N's ideas the wrong way and thought they supported dictatorship. He wasn't supporting selfishness. The will to power isn't fundamentally good or bad. It changes depending on how we use it in our goals, challenges, and creative projects. N doesn't think that life is about finding meaning. It's about making it. The drive to push limits is what makes life worth living. Divine hiding place. If there is a God, then why is the world so quiet? Why do so many people look for God's presence but only find his absence? These questions show the issue of God's hiddenness, which is a test of faith, belief, and even God himself. John L. Schellenberg, a philosopher, stated this argument by asking, if there is a perfectly loving God, why wouldn't that presence be clear? In Divine Hiddenness and Human Reason, he says that a loving God would make it impossible to not believe, but many honest seekers of the truth are still not convinced. Does the lack of sound mean that God isn't there or doesn't care? Some theists say that the fact that God is hidden protects human rights. If there was no doubt that God existed, people might feel forced to believe, which could weaken real faith. Critics, like Schellenberg, say that freedom and information aren't mutually exclusive. Knowing that a loved one exists doesn't take away your freedom to choose them, and knowing that God exists would only make free will stronger. Others say that being hidden has a reason, like helping people grow spiritually or putting their faith to the test. Still, these answers don't seem enough to a lot of people, especially those whose doubts come from genuinely wanting to know more. The problem of evil is made worse by the fact that God is hidden. If pain already makes you question God's goodness, why keep quiet when people are hurting? Wouldn't being clear bring comfort or hope? This isn't just an intellectual matter. It's also very personal. People who are having a hard time with their prayers not being answered may feel abandoned in the silence. But some see it as a call to think, to look for answers, and to grow. Meaninglessness. Built in. Your life has no point. Mine doesn't either. The universe doesn't care about your problems or goals. Still, this truth may be the most freeing thing you'll ever find. Existentialists like N, Sartre, and Camus say that the universe doesn't have a reason built in. Sartre said, "Man is condemned to be free, which means that we live without a clear goal and are free to make our own meaning." But it's not easy to face the void. Camus named this tension the absurd condition, which is the clash between our need for meaning and the seeming lack of it in the world. Camus said that life was like a man who was always pushing a rock uphill, but it kept rolling back down. Even though the fight is useless, Coppus's refusal to give up turns his pain into freedom. Camus comes to the conclusion that Coppus must be happy. What does this mean for us? Inherent meaninglessness isn't a problem to fix, but a reality to embrace. Without cosmic rules dictating purpose, we're free to make our own. Every choice gets weight because we give it significance. These things, art, relationships, and happy moments, aren't gifts from the world. They're wins carved out of chaos. You are not locked up by the void. It sets you free. You have more power than ever in a world with no purpose. Death of ego. Who are you? Not your name, your job, or even your emotions. What's left after you take those away? The answer to ego death is spooky. The self dissolves, and there are no more barriers between you and the world. There is only raw existence left. In mystical traditions, Eastern ideologies, and modern psychology, the idea of ego death is very important. In Buddhism, it fits with anatta, which means no self, and challenges the idea of a constant self. In Hinduism, it means understanding that the self, jiva, is an illusion that shows how Brahman is one. Both believe that letting go of the ego is the way to wisdom. Carl Jung studied ego death in psychology and found a link between it and individuation, a process in which the ego faces the unconscious and lets go of the false ideas of division. He said it was a battle with the self that showed something much bigger than the person. Ego death isn't just an idea, though. It's a real, often scary event. A lot of people say it feels like they've lost their I, whether they're meditating, practicing spirituality, or going on drug trips. Timothy Lai said it was the full overcoming of self and the coming into being of the infinite. Why attempt to have such an event? Ego death breaks down the false ideas we hold on to, like our separateness, our jobs, and our fears. There is now a deep sense of oneness with everything, a clarity that frees and changes people. That said, it's not always easy. As the self fights against its own destruction, letting go of the ego can feel like death. But the other side is freedom, the end of wants and ties. Why don't you say who you are? You could say your name, a memory, or the core of you. What if, though, that self is just a story your mind makes up? A fundamental tenet of Buddhist philosophy, the no-self doctrine, asserts this. Anatta, or the rejection of a fixed, unchanging self, is at the heart of this teaching. The Buddha didn't believe that there was a core you that controlled your thoughts and deeds. He instead talked about 5 groups that make up human existence: the body, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and awareness. These parts give the impression of a whole self, but there isn't a centerpiece that holds them all together. Picture a river. It looks like it goes on forever, but up close, it's a flow of water that is always changing. The Buddha said that the self is the same way, a process that is always changing, not a set thing. This point of view has very important effects. What does identity, attachment, or pain mean if there is no permanent self? The Buddha taught that we suffer a lot because we hold on to our wants, our egos, and the false idea that things will always be the same. When we understand anatta, we can let go of this holding on and be free. A scientist named David Hume agreed with this idea many years later. He wrote, "I can never catch myself without a perception, and I can never see anything else but the perception." Like the Buddha, Hume didn't see any signs of a fixed self. He only saw fleeting feelings. Solipsism. What if you are the only living thing that is aware of itself? The scary thought of solipsism is that there is nothing outside of your own mind that you can know to exist. The people you see, the world you live in, and even the universe itself might be made up by your mind. The scary part is that there's no way to prove it wrong. Solipsism has its roots in ancient philosophy, but René Descartes made it more well-known. In Meditations on First Philosophy, Descartes wrote about how he didn't trust his feelings, his memories, or the real world. The only thing that was sure to him was his own mind. I think, therefore I am. This was what Descartes thought was the basis of knowledge. Solipsism, on the other hand, ends there. It doesn't accept the external promises that Descartes suggested, like God confirming that the world is real. Selfishness, on the other hand, says that only your thoughts, perceptions, and awareness are real. Everything else is just possible. It's a simple but deep problem. Everything you do and feel goes through your mind. How can you be sure that the people you talk to are real and not just in your head? That the world wasn't just made, complete with memories put in to make it seem real? Solipsism was fought against by philosophers like Ludwig Wittgenstein, who said that ideas and language are naturally shaped by interactions with other people. Even the framework of thought would fall apart without a shared world. Personality puzzle. Who are you? Not your name, face, or even the things you remember. Who really are you? The personal identity paradox makes us think about how solid the self we hold on to really is. This paradox asks, what makes you unique? Is it your body, your emotions, or who you are? In his essay concerning human understanding, John Locke said that remembering is at the heart of who we are as people. If you think back to when you were a kid riding a bike or a teen graduating, that consistency is what makes you who you are. But what happens when you can't remember? Do things you've forgotten stop being a part of you? This flaw was pointed out by critics like Thomas Reid, who said that if identity is only based on memory, a person could paradoxically be and not be the same person, depending on which memories they remember. Think about the ship of Theseus. If you change every block on a ship, is it still the same ship? Use that on yourself now. Your memories change, your cells grow back, and your identity changes. Are you the same person you were yesterday or 10 years ago? Modern biology makes things even more difficult. The brain is a constantly changing network, with no set self, but a dynamic process. In his book Reasons and Persons, philosopher Derek Parfit said that identification is a lie. We shouldn't worry so much about being the same person. Instead, we should pay attention to psychological continuity, which means the weak links between yourselves in the past, present, and future. Open individualism. What if you were everyone? I don't mean people in a general sense. I mean every life that has ever been lived and every life that will be lived. Daniel Koch, a philosopher, came up with the radical idea of open individualism, which says that all beings share a single consciousness. Koch says in his book, I Am You, that our identities are lies, like waves on the ocean. No matter what we see, we're all connected to the same big mind. Most of us agree with closed individualism, which says that everyone has a unique self that starts at birth and stops when they die. This is what open individualism says, by saying that the self is like the walls of a house. These walls seem to define space, but the air flows freely through, undivided. Similarly, the separate selves we see are only temporary views of the same universal mind. It's not a new idea. Hindus believe that Brahman is a universal self that is connected to each person's soul, which is called Atman. Buddhists believe in anatta, which means no self, which also means permanent identity. Open individualism looks at these old ideas through the lens of current thought. But the effects are very serious. Does being unique matter if we are all the same? Koch says it makes you more responsible, because hurting someone else is like hurting yourself, and helping someone else is like self-directed kindness. Critics say the idea is unprovable, but Koch counters that separateness is just a convincing illusion, like the moon, which seems to glow but only reflects sunlight. Ego tunnel, all a fantasy. Thomas Metzinger's The Ego Tunnel challenges this assumption, claiming that the self isn't real, not in the way you think. Your sense of you is actually a mental creation your brain made to help you get around in the real world. He says, there is no such thing as a self in the world. Nobody ever had or was a self. The ego tunnel is his way of talking about how awareness works. Think of your mind as a tunnel that lets you see and feel the world. The colors, sounds, and feelings inside all feel real and intense. However, what you're feeling is not reality. It's a simulation that your brain made from the information it had at the time. After the tunnel, the world is filled with raw, unfathomable complexity that you can't even begin to understand. Why does this happen in your brain? Getting by. Reality is sped up in the ego tunnel to help you make quick choices, make friends, and find meaning. But it also gives you the impression that you're a single, separate being handling a real world. This makes me wonder, if the self is an illusion, then do you really have power over what you do? Why should you believe what you see if it's been filtered through a simulation? Metzinger says that realizing the ego tunnel frees us to change how we see ourselves and live more wisely. Absolute loneliness. Being alone isn't what loneliness is. It's something much deeper and more stable. Absolute loneliness is not having anyone to talk to. It's realizing that no one will ever fully understand or live your life as you do. There will always be a hole between your mind and everyone else's, no matter how many connections you make or how deeply you connect. This idea has been debated for a long time by philosophers and existentialists. Jean-Paul Sartre said that people live in a state of isolation, where they are basically alone even when they are with other people. Your thoughts, feelings, and inner world are your own and can't be seen or touched by anyone else. People can look at you, talk to you, and even love you, but they will never fully become you. Neuroscience backs up this sad truth. Your experiences are stored in the structure of your brain and are shaped by your thoughts, feelings, and memories. You are the only one who can see the world the way you do. Language, the best way for us to connect with each other, has its limits. Words can only come close to describing how you feel. They can never fully convey the raw experience of being you. This realization makes me feel uneasy. It means that there is a part of you that is not seen or touched, even when there are a lot of people in the room, or when you are very close to someone. Will to live. If you really think about your life, one thing becomes clear. Most of it is pain, with only a few happy moments here and there. Even though you are in constant pain, you keep living because of something that makes no sense: the insatiable will to live. For Arthur Schopenhauer, this will was the most important thing in the world. He talked about the world as will and representation as a blind, never-ending drive that makes all living things live, reproduce, and keep going. It's not logical, aware, or on purpose. It just is. Schopenhauer wrote, "The will to live is sure of life, so it clings to it even in the worst situations." Joy, on the other hand, comes from the will, not the other way around. Give in to one wish, and another one will appear. Escape one pain, and a new one emerges. Schopenhauer claimed that pleasure is fleeting while suffering is constant. He wrote, "All satisfaction is only negative, the removal of a wish and pain." This battle is universal in nature. Life devours life in a cycle of survival. In human life, ambition often leads to emptiness. Unlike animals, we reflect on our suffering, yet stay trapped by the will, amplifying our own misery. Hell is other people, hell isn't where. Hell is other people, you go. It's who you're with. Jean-Paul Sartre's idea that hell is other people shows a deep truth about how people relate to each other. For Sartre, being stuck under the gaze of others is what torment is all about. The way people see and judge us shapes our lives, making us see ourselves through their eyes instead of how we really are. Imagine that you are in front of a funny house mirror that makes your image look funny. The mirror is what everyone sees of you, no matter how you try to change it or explain what you really look like. In her defense, Sartre said that this is how it feels to be with other people. Every look and opinion puts on you a version of yourself that might not be true to who you really are. This dynamic isn't just a bothersome feeling once in a while. It's an essential part of being human. The need for approval keeps us stuck in a circle where we want to be noticed, even though it makes us less real. Sartre thought that when other people look at us, They turn us into things and take away our freedom to define ourselves on our own. Even when things are going well, relationships with people always have this tension. Being around other people creates an invisible web of judgments and expectations that traps us in roles we never fully choose. For many, this unresolvable conflict is what it means to be human. The constant pull between the need to be seen and the loss of freedom that comes with it. Nihilism. Nature doesn't care if you are good or bad, fair or unfair. This is the stark foundation of Sadean Nihilism, a philosophy that comes from the odd works of the Marquis Dada, whose ideas question the very nature of morality. Sadean Nihilism is based on the idea that there are no absolute moral truths. Dasein said that ideas like virtue and justice are made up by people and then forced on a natural world that is impersonal and doesn't care about them. His book Justine has a line that says, "Nature made us all just to hurt each other." Dad thinks that nature is only concerned with life and desire, not with what people think is right and wrong. This cruel lack of care shows up in Cade's view of people. Rather than reason or ethics, he thought that people were controlled by their basic urges. He came to the conclusion that if morality is just something people make up, then following its rules is not necessary. In The Philosophy in the Bedroom, he said that the only way to be truly free is to give in to your natural urges, no matter how bad they are. The teleological suffering. The world we see has all the traits we would expect if there is, at its core, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, and only cruel indifference. Richard Dawkins said something that really gets to the heart of teleological suffering. The idea that pain has no meaning, purpose, or redemption. Nature is indifferent to pain. Predators hunt, prey suffers, and parasites thrive, all as a result of survival, not morality or design. Suffering in this view isn't a test or lesson. It's simply a result of life's relentless processes. There's no cosmic plan, no higher goal to explain the pain that pervades life. The word deli comes from the Greek words telos, which means end or purpose, and dis, which means wrong or out of place. It doesn't believe the comforting stories that say pain is for the greater good. Instead, it shows that the world is driven by chaos and competition, not divine order. Why does the sight of a dead body rotting make us feel so sick? Why do we avoid things that make it hard to tell the difference between humans and other animals? These responses come from objection, an idea that Julia Kristeva writes about in her book Powers of Horror. Objection is more than just fear or disgust. It's the mental unease we feel when something breaks the rules that make us who we are. Christ says that our sense of self depends on being able to tell the difference between self and other, life and death, and clean and unclean. The AB is anything that breaks these rules and makes us face what we've pushed down or ignored. Fluids from the body, like blood or vomit, make us feel uneasy because they blur the line between inside and outside, telling us of how weak and mortal we are. A corpse, which was once alive but is now breaking down, stands between us and other things. It presents us with the truth of death, which we often try to avoid. God is dead. Friedrich Nietzsche said that God is dead. God is still dead. And we killed him, are some of the most shocking ideas in philosophy. This wasn't a statement. It was a serious warning. It was written in his 1882 book, The Gay Science. N wasn't talking about the death of a real God. He was talking about the fall of the belief systems that had been the foundation of Western civilization for hundreds of years. A big part of this idea is how the Enlightenment, science, and secularization changed things. People stopped believing in God and started believing in reason and progress instead. This freed people from religious dogma. But I thought this was a two-edged sword. Religion had given people a moral framework, but now it was gone. People were left floating in a world without clear meaning or values. He used the story of the crazy man to show this existential problem. In it, a man runs into a marketplace and says, "God is dead, and we killed him." What he said doesn't hit home with the people in the room, who laugh. The crazy person is sad and asks, "What did we do when we freed the earth from its sun? Are we not always plunging? Is there still any up or down? Without God, humanity is without a base, and it risks falling into nihilism, the idea that life has no point." Being and nothingness. Existence comes before soul. Being a nothingness, Jean-Paul Sartre's most important statement, sums up his existentialist philosophy. People are not born with a nature or purpose that is already set. Instead, our essence is made up of the things we do and the choices we make. To SRA, what makes us unique is not what we are, but what we do. Being in itself and being for itself are the two ways that SRA sees being. Being in itself refers to things that don't move or have feelings and just exist. Things like a chair or a rock, for instance, can't think about themselves or change. On the other hand, human awareness is about being for itself. People, on the other hand, are flawed and always changing because they can think about, choose, and imagine what might be possible. The idea of nothingness is at the heart of SRA's philosophy. Being conscious creates a space between us and the world, which is nothing. People can imagine what might be and act openly because of this gap. But this freedom comes with a huge responsibility: the duty to use our choices to shape our lives and the lives of others. Eternal torment of samsara. Life is pain all the time, not just when things are bad. This is the core of samsara, which in Buddhism means the never-ending circle of birth, death, and rebirth. Not just one life or a figure of speech for fight, but the endless repetition of being alive itself. Every action plants a seed that shapes future lives. This is called karma, the rule of cause and effect. However, even good karma can't free you from samsara as long as you have desire, attachment, and blindness. Not only is the pain in samsara terrible, but so is the illusion that keeps us stuck in it. We chase short-lived happiness because we think it will make us whole, but it only leaves us feeling empty. Even the good things in life, like love, wealth, and comfort, don't last forever. They slip away like sand through fingers. Nagarjuna said that samsara was like a sea of pain, with waves of birth and death that never stopped. Everything in this sea is connected by karma chains, from bugs to kings. Buddhism says that this pain comes from not knowing the truth. We think that things that change are eternal, things that hurt are enjoyable, and our own selves are real things. We can't see the chance of liberation because of these false beliefs. Nirvana is the way out. It's not a place, but a state that goes beyond pain, desire, and being yourself. To reach that level of freedom, you have to let go of your attachments and see the world as it really is, temporary, connected, and devoid of any inherent core. The shadow. There's a hidden side of you that you don't want to see or that you put on other people. This is what Carl Jung called the shadow. It shapes who you are all the time, whether you are aware of it or not. Jung thought that the shadow holds all the things we don't want about ourselves, like our dark urges, forbidden wishes, and flaws we don't see. You can't just be evil, though. Any part of you that doesn't match the picture you want to show is bad. When we hide these traits, usually as kids, to fit in with family or social standards, the shadow is born. In a strange way, the shadow gets more power the more we try to control it. Jung warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will run your life, and you'll call it fate." Your shadow shows up in subtle ways, like anger you project, envy that looks like criticism, or fears that make you make decisions. The process of facing the shadow was called shadow integration by Jung. It's not about giving in to urges, but about knowing them. You become an individual, or a whole, true self, by facing your shadow. When hidden traits, like drive or creativity, are recognized, they can turn into strengths. People often say that humanity is a marvel of development because it can do art, science, and love. But to a misanthrope, people are a cancer because they are greedy, cruel, and want to destroy themselves. Is this a hard truth? Or is it just the disappointment of people who can see things too clearly? Misanthropy, which means not trusting or loving people, has been around for a long time. Diogenes, an ancient Greek scholar, walked around Athens with a lantern and said he was looking for an honest man, but he didn't think there was one. Arthur Schopenhauer went even further and said that people are led by a blind, selfish will that causes them to suffer forever. Misanthropy isn't just philosophical gloom. It's a criticism of what it means to be human. Misanthropes say that our ability to destroy things is greater than our ability to do good things. The species' intelligence often makes its flaws worse, as shown by war, environmental failure, and systemic injustice. Myth of human sacrifice. Sacrificing a person to make the gods happy, gain their favor, or restore balance is one of the scariest ideas in the world. What made people all over the world participate in these kinds of practices? And what does this tell us about the human mind? Sacrificing people happened in many places and times, from ancient China to Mesopotamia, from Aztec sites to Celtic Druids. At its core was the idea that blood was the most valuable thing in the universe's economy. For the Aztecs, it wasn't just ritual, it was survival. The gods gave their lives to make the world, and people owed them something. David Carrasco, a historian, said that the sun would not rise without blood to feed it. Sacrifice was necessary for the world to survive. But why people, and not animals or crops? Life itself was holy and valuable beyond compare. Giving a human life was the ultimate gift, and it carried a lot of spiritual weight. René Girard, a philosopher, studied the psychology of sacrifice and suggested that it arose to solve problems in society. His scapegoat mechanism theory said that groups put their collective blame or fear on one victim, which brought them back together. It wasn't just spiritual sacrifice. It also strengthened political power. Authority was claimed by priests and kings who could act as a go-between for people and God. N said that sacrifice changed over time. Bloodshed as a ritual gave way to spiritual sacrifices like self-denial and guilt, which were shaped by religions like Christianity. Human sacrifice isn't done anymore, but its stories and the idea of giving up something for a better cause live on. Death drive. Why do we hurt ourselves? Why do we sometimes pick disorder over order and safety over fun? The founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, thought he knew the answer. It was called the death drive. Deep inside our minds, there is a dark and primordial force that wants us to kill ourselves and go back to nothingness. Freud wrote about the death drive, or thanatos, in his 1920 book, Beyond the Pleasure Principle. Before that, Freud had been studying the joy principle, which says that people want joy and want to avoid pain. He did notice something strange, though. Not all behavior fits with this instinct. People hurt themselves, repeat patterns that are bad for them, and are drawn to pain. Why? Freud said that along with our desire to live, there is another force pulling us toward death. At its core, the death drive is a desire to go back to a time when there was no life, a time when everything was still. Freud said it was a natural urge in living things to return to how things were before. It shows up as decay, risky behavior, and the tendency to hurt oneself that affects both people and groups. Nihilism thinks that life doesn't have any meaning or ultimate goal built into it. This is what nihilism says. It is a philosophy that gets rid of assumptions and makes us face reality without any comforting illusions. While it doesn't dismiss life, it does push us to see it for what it is, unedited and real. Nihilism basically says that the things we trust, like morality, religion, and identity, are just made up by people. The beliefs and ideals that used to give life meaning are now meaningless, leaving a space where certainty used to be. We have to question the truth of our ideals and goals when these frameworks fall apart. If there is no ultimate truth or goal, what justifies any of our actions? Some people see nationalism as a way to achieve deep freedom. People are free to make up their own values and meanings when there is no set goal. From this point of view, nihilism goes from being an ideology of despair to a basis for personal empowerment and making your own reality. Others, though, see nihilism as a fall into chaos and misery. Without a higher power or objective meaning, life could become a set of pointless actions, where morality isn't important and existence feels empty. Extreme doubt. Are you sure the world you see is real? What if your memories, thoughts, and even your sense of who you are all lies? A philosophy that asks, "How do you know anything at all?" is based on this unsettling thought. In fact, radical skepticism questions the very basis of confidence. René Descartes, a philosopher who lived in the 1600s, faced this straight on. He doubted everything: his senses, the world, even his own body. He wrote, "I shall assume that some evil demon has used all his power to trick me." Even the simplest facts, like the existence of the external world, could be questioned. During his search for total certainty, Descartes came to one firm conclusion: I think, therefore, I am. The fact that he was doubting himself showed that he was a thinking being, but it was a lone certainty. Everything beyond his thoughts stayed suspect. David Hume took this doubt further. He said that our minds are just a bunch of fleeting thoughts that are put together by habit instead of reasoning. He even asked if there was a cause and effect. How do we know that one thing leads to another? Hume thought that the things we think we know about the world, like the sun rising tomorrow, are based on chances, not certainties. Radical doubt isn't just found in philosophy books. When you remember something wrong or think a dream is real, you enter its unsettling world. It doesn't give any reassuring answers. It just says that certainty is hard to find. Reality falls apart the more we look into it. So take a moment the next time you're sure of something. Question: you might not be as sure as you thought you would be. The quiet of God. If there is a God, why is he quiet? The silence of God is a problem that has been bothering people for hundreds of years. This question is at its core. The question isn't whether God exists or not, but why, if he does, he seems so far away, especially when we are hurting and have doubts. Søren Kard, a Danish philosopher, thought about this quiet a lot. He didn't see it as a lack of something, but as a test of faith. He said that faith is the clash between the endless emotion of the mind and the objective lack of certainty. Karen, the silence made her take a jump into the unknown and trust God without any proof. Simone Five and other thinkers see the silence of God as strange when people are suffering, while thought that quiet wasn't a sign of abandonment, but a call to find meaning in hardship. She wrote that, "What makes Christianity great is that it doesn't look for a supernatural way to fix pain, but for a supernatural way to use it. The problem deepens with a darker possibility. What if the quiet isn't a test or a mystery, but just silence? What if there is no word, no voice, and no presence from God?" Antinatalism says that every birth is a gamble, where the prize is life itself. One of the most unsettling ideas in philosophy is antinatalism, which says that this risk isn't worth it. In it, it is said that having a child is always harmful, even if you mean well. Many people today are against nationalism, and David Benatar's book, Better Never to Have Been, makes a strong case for it. Benatar's theory is based on the fact that pleasure and pain are not equal. While he agrees that pain is bad and pleasure is good, he also says that the lack of pain is always good, even if no one is around to feel it. Being without joy isn't a bad thing, though, because there's no one to miss it. He said that bringing someone into the world hurts, but not bringing someone into the world doesn't. This argument makes us think about what life is all about. Many people see life as a gift, but Benatar sees it as a load full of pain that can't be avoided. People have to deal with hunger, sickness, loss, and the fact that they will eventually die. Even though life has joys, Benatar says they are short-lived and often overwhelmed by pain. Truth versus appearance. What if the world you see isn't really the world? What if everything you see, hear, feel, and even time is just a perfectly made illusion? Philosophy asks us to confront the idea that our senses might be deceiving us about the relationship between appearance and truth. In his Allegory of the Cave, Plato wrote about this. People locked up in the dark see only shadows on the wall and think they are real. Plato said that most of us live like those prisoners, taking what we see for what it really is. For him, the real world is beyond the senses, in a place where forms don't change and can only be reached through reason. In Meditations on First Philosophy, written many centuries later, Durt took this even further. He didn't trust his senses, his body, or even the reality of the world. Could it all be a dream or the work of a bad demon? His doubts led him to one sure thing. Cogito, ergo sum, which means, I think, therefore I am. For Descartes, the only thing that was real was awareness. Today's science has added more pieces to this puzzle. In quantum physics, particles are seen to be in superposition, and observations change these states. Neuroscience has shown that our brains rebuild what we see. Colors are interpretations, not real things. Einstein showed that everything is relative, even time. It is shaped by motion and gravity. Still, we believe our feelings. We live by what we see and hear, even though virtual reality and other lies make it hard to tell the difference between real and fake. It is important to remember that philosophers like Kant say we can only see the world as it seems to us. Zeno's doubt. If you cross a room, will you ever get to the other side? It seems simple. You take one step, then another, and you get there. Zeno of Aya says you'll never make it, though. You'll get stuck in a never-ending loop of steps that get smaller and smaller, going forward, but never getting there. This is Zeno's paradox of motion, and it makes us question the most basic things we think we know about the world. Zeno's dichotomy paradox says that you have to get to the middle point before you can get to the other side. There is an endless number of ways to divide each step, though. First, you have to get halfway to that point. How can you ever finish an infinite series if each step takes time? The story of Achilles and the tortoise, another paradox, brings this to life even more. A tortoise gets a head start thanks to Achilles, which is the fastest runner. When Achilles gets to where the turtle started, the tortoise is already further ahead. This process keeps going forever, which means that no matter how fast Achilles runs, he will never catch up to the tortoise. These paradoxes don't say that motion doesn't happen. They show how perception and mathematical thinking are at odds with each other. The old Greeks didn't understand this, but Newton and Libet's calculus proved that sequences that go on forever can add up to results that are limited in number. Not because Zeno was wrong, but because his paradoxes showed how limited early mathematics was. Achilles beats the tortoise, and you cross the room. Zeno's puzzles survive because they push us to question infinity, continuity, and reality itself. When you take a step next time, think about this. Even the simplest motion is made up of an endless number of smaller motions. This is how logic and experience connect. Infinite regress. What makes sense of the universe? It looks like an easy question, but it's not. It's like pulling on a thread that never ends. Every answer leads to another. This is the infinite regress problem, which is one of the most difficult problems in philosophy. There is an infinite regress when every answer depends on another, making a never-ending chain of why questions. Aristotle pointed this out in Metaphysics by asking, does the chain go on forever if every cause needs a cause before it? He came up with the idea of a prime mover, which is an uncaused cause that starts everything moving. But is this an answer, or a convenient stopgap? The problem comes up everywhere we look for final answers. In morality, if actions are right because they follow rules, what justifies the rules? If rules are based on principles, then what makes the beliefs right? The regress spirals endlessly, undermining any solid basis for ethics. The problem is just as worrisome in epistemology. Claims of knowledge are based on reasons, which need to be backed up. This is what philosopher Laurence Bonjour called a vicious regress, because it makes clarity seem impossible. How can we get out of this? Like Descartes did with I think therefore I am. Foundationalism argues for facts that are obvious and don't need to be explained. Coherentism, on the other hand, says that views support each other in a web-like way, though some critics say this seems pointless. Some people, like Paul Tillich, see endless regress as natural, which means they think the search itself is worthwhile. Doubts that are too strong. What do you know for sure? Hyperbolic doubt is a way of being very skeptical that was created by René Descartes. It is based on this question. At first, you start to question everything, including your memories, your senses, and even the world around you. Descartes used this method not to unravel reality, but to reveal a single, unshakable truth. Descartes wrote in Meditations on First Philosophy that if you want to find total certainty, you have to get rid of everything that could be wrong. To start, he asked himself, can you trust what you see or feel? I will consider as false anything that is not completely certain and indubitable. In water, a stick looks bent, and things far away look smaller. How can you trust your feelings if they lie even once? Next, he had doubts about his memories and thoughts. Or could they be false impressions, like dreams? We often think we know something in our dreams, but when we wake up, we find out we were wrong. Then Descartes brought up the idea of an evil demon. What if a powerful liar changed your world so that everything you believe is not true? But even though Descartes had a lot of doubts, he found one thing that was certain: doubting itself. He had to be real if he was doubting. He came to the famous statement, I think, therefore I am, from this realization. Existential anxiety. You know you're living and aware. But why? As soon as you think about this question, you feel it. A hollow uneasiness, a weight pressing down on you. This is psychological angst, which is pain that comes from the weight of life itself, not from fear of death. The founder of existentialism, Søren Kard, looked into this in his idea of worry. He thinks that we feel angry when we realize how free we are, when we can choose, define ourselves, and make our future. But freedom comes with a scary truth. There are no promises, and no one can really tell you what to do. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, Kard wrote. This dizziness comes from the fact that anything could happen. Imagine that you are standing on the edge of a cliff. You are afraid of falling, but you also know that you could jump. Existential angst is all about being uncomfortable with the fact that you are the only one who can make decisions. Jean-Paul Sartre expanded on this idea, calling humans condemned to be free. Without a divine plan or predetermined purpose, we must make our own meaning. This freedom makes you free, but it also holds you back. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself, Sartre wrote. But what if we don't know what to make? What if the weight of freedom is too much to bear? Metaphysical rebellion. What happens when someone doesn't accept the world as it is, not just the way it is socially or politically? This is metaphysical revolt, which is something Albert Camus writes about in The Rebel. It's not just fighting back against wrongdoing. It's also fighting back against the insanity of life itself. Camus starts with a hard truth. Being human is silly. We look for meaning in a world that doesn't give it to us. The absurdity lies in the clash between our need for meaning and the universe's lack of interest. Metaphysical revolt happens when someone doesn't want to accept this as true. Rebellion, on the other hand, is not hopelessness. It is resistance. Camus writes, "I rebel, therefore we exist." The rebel doesn't give up, because life doesn't have a meaning on its own. Instead, they make their own. It's a challenge to the world, an assertion that life can still be lived with passion and authenticity. In Greek mythology, Prometheus disobeyed the gods by stealing fire for people. He wasn't just questioning authority, he was questioning the very nature of life. Similarly, the philosophical rebel doesn't want to live in a world that doesn't have any meaning. Instead, they try to find values in a world that seems pointless. But Camus warns of the risks of rebellion. When rebellion turns dogmatic, it can lead to tyranny. In the name of freedom, revolutions often brought about new kinds of oppression. Camus tells rebels to accept doubt and reject systems that are set in stone. For him, rebellion isn't a solution, but a way of being, a refusal to stop questioning reality. He writes, "The only way to deal with a world that isn't free is to become so completely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." We find freedom in defiance. Aletheia and oblivion. What if the most important facts aren't hidden, but just forgotten? The old Greek idea of aletheia, which means truth without concealment, says that reality is not something we make up, but something we find. It's a process of lifting the veil of ignorance to see what's been hidden. In Greek, aletheia means the state of not being hidden. For philosophers like Heidegger, truth isn't static or absolute. It's an ongoing revelation of nature. Opposite this is leth, meaning oblivion or forgetfulness. Myth says that people who drank from the river Lethe forgot everything. Oblivion, in this case, doesn't just mean forgetting facts. It also means losing touch with greater truths, which can happen when you get too busy or stuck in routines. Heidegger said that modern life often keeps us in leth. The truth is buried under layers of noise and ease, caused by technology, social norms, and never-ending distractions. It's not that the truth is hard to find. It's that we stop looking for it. Think about a forest. For someone in a hurry, it looks like just trees. But if you stop and look closely, the forest shows off its wealth, its complex ecosystems, and its quiet life. This is aletheia at work, the lost truth coming back to life. But getting to the truth is never finished. For every truth revealed, others stay hidden. The search for truth is an ongoing battle against the pull of leth. As Heidegger wrote, "To be is to stand in the clearing where beings reveal themselves." The uncanny. Why do things that look and act like people bother us more than things that aren't human at all? The answer lies in the uncanny, an idea that looks at the unsettling balance between feeling like you know someone and not knowing them, when something feels like home, but isn't quite right. In his 1919 essay, Das Unheimliche, The Unhomelike, Sigmund Freud wrote about this. Freud thought that the uncanny happened when something familiar turned strange, which caused deep psychic unease. The doll that looks just like a real person, the robot that seems too real, or the shadow in the mirror that doesn't quite follow. These events throw off our sense of reality and show how fragile it is. Freud said that the uncanny was connected to feelings and memories that had been pushed down. He called it the return of the repressed, which happens when scary things happen and bring up deep-seated fears. For example, A robot that looks like a person could make us think about how fragile life is, and where the line is between human and machine. Masahiro Mori, a Japanese roboticist, built on this idea with his uncanny valley theory. Mori noticed that as robots look more human, our affinity grows, until they become almost human, but not quite. At this point, they make people feel uncomfortable instead of pity, because their human-like traits feel strangely off. Uncanny things are a big part of art and stories, like Frankenstein's moving body and The Shining's creepy twins. It pushes the limits of who we are and what is real. It makes us realize how much we depend on predictability, and how our view of the world is shaken when that is lost. Phenomenological reduction. What if you could strip away all assumptions, ideas, and biases until only raw, unfiltered experience remained? This is the essence of phenomenological reduction, a method introduced by philosopher Edmund Husserl to reveal the true nature of consciousness. Husserl thought that sometimes we take our ideas about the world as fact. We constantly color our events with ideas we already have, cultural influences, and our own past. In order to see the world as it really is in awareness, Husserl suggested bracketing, or epoche, which means letting go of all assumptions and judgments. The process starts with abandoning what Husserl called the natural attitude, our default belief in the world's external reality. We only look at how the world looks in awareness instead. Husserl wrote, "We must free ourselves from the prejudice of the existence of the world." This doesn't say that the world doesn't exist. It just wants to show how people experience it. This way of thinking changes the focus from things to the mental processes that make them appear. When you see a tree, for example, you're not just viewing an object. Your senses, your memory, and your interpretation are all working together. Husserl's method reveals these layers and shows how the changing link between the observer and the observed shapes experience. One important idea is that awareness is always active. It's not passive. It's always aiming at something, whether it's seeing, thinking, or feeling. Phenomenology shows us how experiences are structured by looking at this link. Some people doubt that we can really get rid of all our biases, but Husserl said that trying to be clear leads to deep insights. His way of doing things inspired thinkers like Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, who built on the transformative potential of phenomenology. Ding an sich. What is life really like? Do we see the world as it really is, or just how we see it? Kant answered this question with the idea of the Ding an sich, which means thing in itself. This idea makes us question everything we think we know about being. Kant made a difference between the world as it is and how it looks to us in his critique of pure reason. He says that we never directly feel reality. Instead, the way our minds are built shapes what we see, including space, time, and cause and effect. These are not things that the outside world has, but rather rules that we put on it. I agree with what Kant said. We can never go beyond our own abilities to reach the thing itself. The Ding an sich stands for the true nature of reality, which is beyond our understanding. Just think about a tree. The form, color, and feel of something are just what your senses tell you about it. The tree's essence, or ultimate truth, is still a secret. How can we say we know something if we can't know the thing itself? Kant said that even though we can only see what we see, our shared cognitive structure makes things consistent, which helps us get around in the world. Even though we can't know reality, it makes sense. This idea fits with what we know now about science. Quantum mechanics says that particles exist in undefined states until they are observed. This is similar to Kant's idea that ultimate truth can't be directly experienced. Inverted spectrum. What if the red you see looks totally different to someone else, but you'd never know? This is the inverted rainbow, a thought experiment that makes us think about how we see things and how much we know. The reversed spectrum was first used by John Locke in an essay concerning human understanding, 1690. It is based on the idea of two people who both say the sky is blue and stop at a red light. But what one person sees as blue, the other might see as green. Their perceptions are inverted, yet their behavior is identical, making it impossible to detect the difference. At its core, this shows the problem of qualia, which are the raw, personal experiences of sense. How do you know if the red you see is the same as someone else's? The inverted spectrum suggests you don't and can't. Modern neuroscience shows that wavelengths of light processed in the visual cortex of the brain affect how we see colors. But the brain does more than just store information. It also shapes how we see colors. If that construction is different for each person, we will never know because it is locked in our minds. This thought experiment goes beyond color, touching on the hard problem of consciousness described by David Chalmers. How can we really understand other thoughts if we can't get to their subjective experiences? Could artificial intelligence act like a person without ever becoming conscious? Could it have its own range that is backwards? Moral luck. If morality is up to us, how much power do we really have to choose to be good or bad? What if the results of our deeds, which are shaped by things we can't change, decide how we're judged? Philosopher Thomas Nagel came up with the unsettling idea of moral luck, which makes us question how fair our moral decisions are. Nagel wants to know how much morality is based on luck. We often judge someone based on outcomes they didn't fully control, even when we know what they were trying to do. Two drivers are texting while they're moving. One gets home safely, while the other causes an accident that kills someone. Even though they both did the same thing, society sees one as careless and doesn't punish the other. Is that fair? There are different kinds of moral luck. Resultant luck decides what happens, like with the driver. Circumstantial luck depends on the circumstances a person is in, like when they're never tested morally versus when they have to make a hard choice. And constitutive luck is the courage and impulsiveness we are born with because of our genes and how we were raised. Are we responsible for qualities shaped by things we never chose? This idea raises profound questions. If so much of morality relies on factors outside our control, can anyone truly deserve blame or praise? Some people say that accepting moral luck makes people less responsible, but Nagel says it shows how hard it is to make moral decisions. It's impossible to avoid the tension between what we can control and what we can't when we make moral decisions, he writes. Have you ever thought about what kind of rules you would make for a society if you didn't know your place in it? This is the veil of unknowing, a thought experiment that John Rawls wrote about in his book, A Theory of Justice. It's an extreme way to think about fairness that forces us to imagine justice without favoritism or bias. Rawls wants us to imagine the original position, which is a made-up situation in which we make the rules for society while being completely unaware of them. The catch is that you don't know your gender, race, social class, skills, or how much money you will have in the future. You could be anyone, from a poor person to a billionaire. Rawls says that this uncertainty would make us create a society that is truly fair, since we wouldn't know if we'd be a part of it or not. Rawls comes up with two rules of fairness based on this. First, everyone should have the same basic rights and freedoms, such as the right to speak and think freely. Second, differences in social and economic status are only okay if they help those who are least fortunate. That's the difference principle, which makes sure that the weak are safe. The veil of stupidity hides every kind of bias. It's not about being kind. It's about what's best for yourself when you don't know what will happen. You would want a world where everyone has the chance to be respected and successful, if you could be born into any job. Some people say it's too optimistic or puts redistributive justice ahead of freedom. But Rawls's thought experiment makes us question the way things are now and ask, would this still feel fair if I didn't know my place? It's not just a way to imagine fairness. The veil of blindness is a picture of how justice could be. Moral non-cognitivism. When you say, stealing is wrong, are you saying a fact or expressing how you feel? Moral non-cognitivism says that moral statements are not objective facts, but rather emotions, attitudes, or commands. It wants us to rethink what it means to be moral. Emotivism is an important part of non-cognitivism that was pushed by AJA, says that moral statements are emotional expressions. It's wrong to steal is the same thing as boo, stealing. In the same way, helping others is good means, yay, help. A argued in language, truth, and logic that moral statements show how someone feels but do not say facts. Rescriptivism, which was led by R.M. Hare, goes farther. Hare said moral comments are not just emotional outbursts, they are also orders. Saying something like, "You should help others," is not describing a truth. It's telling someone what they ought to do. But how can we argue about morality if moral statements aren't true or false? People who are not cognitivists say that moral arguments are not about facts, but about influence. When you say, stealing is wrong, you're not pointing out facts. You're trying to change someone's mind or behavior. Some people are worried that this makes morals subjective and random. People who don't believe in cognition say that morality has always been based on shared emotions and experiences, not on absolute truths. They say that moral statements bring people together, help us behave in a way that is good for society, and keep it together. Take littering as an example. When you say, "That's wrong," you're not saying a cosmic fact. You're telling people they should behave differently. Mackey's error theory. We usually think of morality as lasting, objective, and true for everyone. What if all of that was wrong, though? J.L. That's exactly what Mackey's error theory says. Our moral judgments are based on a lie. Mackey makes the bold claim in ethics, inventing right and bad. There are no objective values. When we say that murder is bad, or that kindness is good, we're not talking about facts about the world. Instead, we're projecting our feelings and cultural norms onto reality. Morality seems objective, but Mackey thinks this is a mistake that everyone makes. Mackey gives two reasons for this. First, there is the argument from relativity, which says that morals are different in different places and times. Things that one society frowns upon, another society praises. This range of morals shows that values aren't fixed in stone. Instead, societies make them to fit their needs. Second, the argument from queerness. If there were objective moral facts, they would be different from everything else in the universe. They would be weird, unknowable things. What would we think about them? Mackey believes it's far more plausible that morality arises from human emotions and social agreements than from metaphysical truths. But Mackey doesn't disagree with morals. He agrees that moral words and feelings are real, but he says they are made up by people and not true in every situation. For example, kindness is good isn't an absolute fact. It's a value we've embraced because it fosters cooperation and harmony. The Euthyphro dilemma. Is something good because God says it's good? Or is it good because God says it's good? The Euthyphro dilemma is a question from 2,000 years ago that questions the very basis of what is right and wrong. In Euthyphro, Plato brings up this problem. Socrates asks, "Is the holy loved by the gods because it is holy, or is it holy because it is loved by the gods?" This seemingly simple question splits morality into two unsettling possibilities. The first possibility is that something is good because God says it is. If this is true, then morality is just a guess. Would it be good if God had told people to hate instead of love? This point of view says that morality is just God's whim, which takes away its value. The second possibility is that God tells us to do something because it is good. In this case, morality has value on its own, apart from God. However, this means that morality exists without divine power. which means that God is not needed for moral truths, and attacks the idea that God is the ultimate moral source. The Euthyphro dilemma creates a paradox. Either morality is arbitrary and not based on divine order, or it exists on its own, which makes God less important. Theists have come up with a third solution. They say that God's nature is good, so morality comes from that. But critics say this just moves the problem. God's nature still decides what is right and wrong. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant got around this problem by basing morals on reason instead of God's will. Some people who don't believe in God say that morality comes from empathy, cooperation, and shared values, so there is no need for spiritual authority. Mortalism in Christianity. Most of us believe that the soul lives forever, which is a central Christian concept. What if that's not right? Christian mortalism is a theological view that disagrees with the idea that people are born with endless life. Instead, it says that immortality is a gift from God, not a natural trait. According to Christian mortalism, people are mortal, and death is a real loss of consciousness, which some people call soul sleep. Eternal life isn't guaranteed because it rests on God's power to bring the dead back to life. According to this view, life after death is a divine act, not something that the soul naturally has. It's not a new idea. Theologians like John Milton argued that the Bible emphasizes resurrection over innate immortality. Milton said in De Doctrina Christiana that a person has a living soul, not an everlasting one. Christians who believe in the afterlife use Bible lines like Ecclesiastes 9:5, "The dead know nothing," and Romans 6:23, "The wages of sin is death," to support their view that death is just a state of being asleep until Judgment Day. Unlike traditional views, Christian mortalism rejects instant entry into heaven or hell. Instead, the dead rest until God chooses their fate, resurrection to eternal life, or annihilation. This goes against the idea of endless torment by showing that annihilation is the worst punishment for bad people. Some people say this makes the soul less important, but others see it as a return to biblical lessons that aren't influenced by philosophy like Plato's. For them, this view shows how gracious and powerful God is, and the resurrection is the key to salvation. If there is an all-loving God and an endless hell, how can these ideas coexist? The idea of hell as a place of eternal punishment has stumped philosophers for hundreds of years. Is it fair, or just a holdover from fear? The idea of eternal torment came from Bible verses like Matthew 25:46, which says, "These will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life." St. Augustine thought that infinite punishment showed how infinite God's justice was. Sinning against an eternal being would have eternal results. Thomas Aquinas had a different view of hell. He said that its pain comes from being separated from God, which is a state that people choose, not because they are evil. But critics say that punishing people for all time for sins that happen in the past is not fair. John Hick, a philosopher, said that if God was truly good, he would save all souls, which means that endless hell is not compatible with divine love. Universalists agree because they think that everyone will be saved in the end, which shows how merciful God is. In contrast, conditionalists support annihilation, which means destroying the soul completely instead of enduring endless pain. People who think today, like C.S. Lewis, change hell into a choice. Lewis wrote in The Great Divorce, "The doors of hell are locked on the inside." This makes it sound like pride and sorrow, not God's wrath, are what make hell happen. Eternal bondage in Maya. We spend our whole lives chasing our wants, thinking that the next goal will bring us happiness. But what if this never-ending effort is just a dream? Advaita Vedanta calls this illusion Maya, the cosmic lie that keeps us stuck in a never-ending circle of pain. Maya, which is often translated as illusion, hides the truth. Adi Shankaracharya says it makes us think that the material world is all there is, which separates us from others and hides our real nature. We forget about our infinite self when we are under Maya's spell and connect with our egos, our things, and our short-lived desires. This false belief keeps us stuck in samsara, the pattern of being born, dying, and being born again. We look for happiness in things like money, fame, or pleasure, but they only last for a short time. The Upanishads say, "What is real does not change. What changes is not real." Maya does not provide lasting happiness because it is not real in the first place. Shankaracharya says that Maya is a reflection of Brahman, which is the real thing. It rules us until we wake up, like a dream. To break free, you need jnana, which is real knowledge that you can get by thinking about yourself and doing spiritual practices. This is also said by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, who says that wise people don't see any difference between the self and the world. Maya is like a mirage. From a distance, it looks real, but up close, it's just a dream. Similarly, Maya's hold is broken when the self, Atman, is seen as one with Brahman. Reality is shown to be endless, eternal, and whole by this awakening. Remarkable freedom and duty. You are free, all of you. You are free, but you are also responsible for everything you do, choose or don't choose. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about this idea of radical freedom, which is both freeing and scary. According to Sartre, people are condemned to be free. Since there is no divine plan or predetermined nature, our purpose is made by the choices we make. Sartre wrote, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." This means that your path is not set by fate or someone else. It is set by you. There are no more reasons for radical freedom. Sartre said that blaming fate or events is dishonest and takes away your freedom. You can choose how to react even when you are being oppressed. Instead of being a helpless victim, you are making meaning. But this freedom is painful because it makes you realize that every choice you make shapes people and shows what you believe in. When you act, you say, "This is how life should be." The power to choose is scary, like being on the edge of a cliff. Sartre said, "Existence comes before essence." You live first, and then you decide what that means. It's scary, but also powerful. If you're stuck in a relationship or job, Sartre would say that you've chosen to stay. It is also a choice to stay quiet when you see unfairness happening. It is a choice to accept the way things are. At the heart of everything that people do is a fight between two forces: Eros, the drive for life, and Thanatos, the drive for death. In Beyond the Happiness Principle, Freud wrote about these ideas and suggested that people's actions are affected not only by their desire for happiness, but also by a darker, more destructive urge. Eros stands for love, life, creation, and protection. It is the force that keeps relationships going, inspires creativity, and keeps life going. Thanatos, on the other hand, represents destruction, violence, and the desire to end all life. Freud thought that this friction between making things and destroying them was what made people human. He saw it as pulling us between the complexity of life and the simplicity of matter that doesn't have life. These forces don't just exist in our minds. They show up in our daily lives. Thanatos wants us to destroy and cause chaos, while Eros wants us to build, love, and give our lives purpose. Imagine an artist who is full of self-doubt while they are working on a masterpiece, or a society that is doing well but is at war with other groups that want to destroy it. Eros and Thanatos are both present in personal and global fights. Some people don't believe in a real death drive, saying that it could just be a misreading of anger or worry. Still, The image hits home because it shows how contradictory we are on the inside. Why do we hurt the things we love or try to stop ourselves from being happy? Carl Jung, who lived at the same time as Freud, thought that this battle was necessary for growth because it creates a balance between opposing forces that leads to change. Living in the conflict between Eros and Thanatos is what life is all about, not getting rid of it. There is a shadow of death in every beginning and a seed of renewal in every end. The bad infinite. Infinity isn't always beautiful. Sometimes it's scary. This is what the German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel meant when he talked about the bad infinite. Many people think of infinity as a place with endless possibilities, but Hegel warned of a darker version of it, an endless loop of meaningless repeat that stops growth instead of promoting it. Hegel said that there are two types of infinity. As information grows and the universe itself expands, so does the true infinite. It changes and grows, going beyond limits. The bad infinite, on the other hand, is still and lifeless. It's an endless cycle that doesn't lead to any new ideas or growth. Picture a number line that goes on forever in both ways. Even though it has no limits, it's empty. It's always the same thing. Imagine going up a staircase that never ends. There are no new floors or distances, just step after step that repeats forever. That's the bad endless, where there is no progress. Hegel saw this as more than just theory. It was a logical warning. He saw this flawed infinity in rigid systems, goals that are out of reach, or obsessive pursuits, where progress gets stuck in a cycle of frustration. Take the search for greatness. If perfection is infinite, then trying to reach it can make us unhappy forever, because each success just makes perfection farther away, causing a cycle that can't be broken. A bad infinite. Hegel said that infinity is neither good nor bad by nature. The important thing is how we deal with it. The real infinite sees boundaries as chances to go beyond them, and it finds meaning in movement and growth. The bad infinite, on the other hand, brings us boredom and locks us in loops that don't lead anywhere. Hegel's idea helps us remember that not all infinities are inspiring. Some tie us up. Real infinity isn't endless repeat. It's change that is meant to happen. Mirror stage. You're not the person you see in the mirror. This reflection, which is both familiar and far away, is at the heart of Jacques Lannes' idea of the mirror stage, which is a central thought in psychoanalysis. Lannes suggested that our sense of self starts with a mistake, an illusion that shapes what we think we are. Babies can recognize their own image in a mirror between the ages of 6 and 18 months. Even though they feel like their body is broken up and disorganized, the mirror shows a perfect, unified picture. The child sees this picture as me, but this sense of togetherness is only a trick. Lannes said that the child's picture in the mirror is a projection and not a true reflection of his or her reality. The I comes into being at this point, when the child sees themselves as something different from the world. But this sense of self is fundamentally isolating, because the I is built on an outside image and not on an inner reality. The difference between how we see ourselves and how we think other people see us shapes our character from this point on. Lannes' idea shows that our sense of self comes from misunderstandings. The person we think we are is not real, but a mask made of cultural standards, other people's looks, and our dreams. Many parts of who we are, from the roles we play to the goals we set, are shaped by outside forces, even when we are adults. Idle talk. A lot of what we say doesn't mean anything. This is what Martin Heidegger meant when he talked about idle talk, which is the shallow, repeated talk that people do all the time. Idle talk isn't just harmless small talk. It takes us away from real life and hides greater truths. Idle talk is when language repeats itself over and over without being thought about. Gossip, cliches, and empty statements are all examples of this. Hegel wrote about it in Being and Time. It's like talking about something without really understanding it. It makes us feel connected, but it keeps us from getting more involved with the world. Think about a story that goes viral and is talked about over and over again. How many of them really understand the situation instead of just repeating what other people have said? Idle talk lives on general chatter that doesn't care about the truth. Hegel doesn't think this is a small irritation. He thinks it leads to fallenness, a state in which we get lost in social noise and give up on more important philosophical questions. We accept ready-made ideas without questioning them, letting them shape our view of the world. The ease of idle talk is what makes it dangerous. It makes us feel like we belong and lets us be a part of shared stories, but it also pulls us away from being real. We stop expressing our own unique points of view and start following basic patterns of conversation. Hegel didn't think all speech was bad. He thought words could either show or hide the truth. Talking about nothing blocks out the deeper meaning of life by making noise instead of thought. Mimetic desire. You don't want things because you want them on your own. You want them because other people want them. The French thinker René Girard came up with the idea of mirrored desire, which is based on this controversial claim. Girard says that human desire isn't independent. It spreads. Often, we don't even realize it, but we want the same things as the people around us. At the heart of competition, conflict, and even murder, Girard says, is this mimicry. There are times when two people want the same thing and see each other as a threat. This competition, which Girard called a mimetic crisis, leads to envy, jealousy, and finding someone to blame. Girard said that societies deal with this tension through rights or by coming together against a scapegoat, directing their anger at one person to bring everyone back together. Mimetic desire is also at the heart of consumer society. Ads don't just show a product, they show people you look up to wanting it. You want them to want the goods, not just buy it. Girard thought that the key to solving society problems was to understand mimetic desire. When we become aware of how other people affect our wants, we can take a step back and ask ourselves if those wants are really our own. Some critics wonder if all wants are mimetic, since some may be natural or shaped by personal taste. Still, Girard's insight says that a big part of what we want comes from watching other people. Because it reveals this hidden process, mimetic theory makes us think about free will, competition, and how complicated human connections are. Think about what you want. This is the idea behind mimetic desire, which was created by philosopher René Girard, and says that our wants are imitations. We want things not because they're valuable in and of themselves, but because other people want them first. Often without realizing it, our goals are formed by copying what other people want. Girard saw this relationship as having three parts: the subject, you; the object, what you want; and the model, the person whose desire you're copying. For example, people often want a new gadget or their dream job because someone else has it or wants it too. This is made worse by ads and social media, which show lives that are meant to make people want to copy them. According to Girard, people are never really competing for things. They are competing because they want the same things as each other. This creates stress and rivalry. We don't just chase things. We also chase the status or validation they stand for. And when more than one person tries to reach the same goal, not because they want to, but because they want to be like others, conflict happens. This leads to a mimetic trap. The more we try to get what other people want, the less happy we are when we get it. As well as mimetic desire, Girard also tied scapegoating. When competition gets out of hand, people often find someone to blame and try to ease the tension by excluding them or making a sacrifice. This is a key part of many religious and cultural traditions. The stranger side of tragedy. Why do we enjoy pain? That's the paradox of tragedy. Why do we want to read about pain, loss, and hopelessness? We try to avoid pain in real life, but we look for it in art. In Poetics, Aristotle said that tragedy is good because it helps people get rid of stress. Feeling emotions like fear and sadness in a safe, controlled setting helps us deal with our weaknesses and leaves us feeling better, even clean. We can face our own fears by looking at the pain on stage. David Hume, however, found this odd. In Of Tragedy, he wrote that what we enjoy about pain is not the suffering itself, but the way art changes it. A well-written tragedy combines sadness and beauty to make pain mean something. This is not what Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in The Birth of Tragedy. He said that tragedy makes us face the harsh facts of life, like chaos, pain, and death. But it also makes us believe in life. Art makes the unbearable livable by turning pain into something that helps us understand life better. Tragedies also bring us together on a psychological level. Seeing other people hurt makes us feel sorry for them and reminds us of our common humanity. When we cry over imagined characters' pain, it makes us feel connected to others who are also hurt. So why do we need bad things to happen? It could be a mix of things: emotional connection, existential conflict, catharsis, and beauty. Tragedies take pain and turn it into something deeper, showing us our fears and wants. Acrasia. Why do you do things that aren't right? It's hard to understand acrasia when you do things that you know are wrong. You know what will happen, but you still choose the other option. Socrates threw out the idea of acrasia by saying that ignorance is the cause of wrongdoing. You would go after what is good if you really knew it. But Plato had a different view. He split the soul into 3 parts in the Republic: reason, spirit, and hunger. He said that acrasia happens when desire, hunger, wins over logic, reason. In Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle went into more detail about this, making a distinction between people who are weak-willed and regret giving in to desire, and people who are self-indulgent and don't feel any conflict. Aristotle said that acrasia is when someone knows what is right but doesn't do it. Now, we're in the modern era, and acrasia is everywhere. Staying up late when you know you need to sleep and giving in to your cravings for a moment. It's the annoying gap between what you want to do and what you actually do. Psychologists say it's a fight between short-term pleasures and long-term goals, or between emotion and reason, and that urges win. What's so interesting about acrasia is that it affects everyone. It's not about how smart or ignorant someone is. It's about how weak human will is. It shows how complicated our brains are, that knowing what's right doesn't mean doing it. What does it mean to say that something exists? This is the main question of meta-ontology, a field of philosophy that looks at how we decide what exists, instead of just asking what exists. Meta-ontology looks at the frameworks and assumptions we use to describe the categories of being, while ontology looks at the categories themselves. In his book, On What There Is, philosopher Willard Van Orman Quine changed the way people talked about this topic by saying that before asking, "Does X exist?" we need to be clearer about the words and standards we're using. The most important question for Quine is, what does it mean to say X exists? He used the legendary horse with wings, Pegasus, as an example. Even though Pegasus doesn't exist in real life, talking about it makes it seem like it does in your mind. So what makes real things, like horses, different from imagined things, like Pegasus? A pragmatic approach was put forward by Quine. Something appears if it is necessary for our best scientific theories to work. For example, electrons are thought to be real because they describe things that can be seen. But this doesn't answer the more important question of why we value some models more than others. Philosopher Eli Hirsch added more depth with his concept of quantifier variance, which means that different ways of thinking about existence can be just as true. One might include abstract things like numbers, while another might not. and neither is more true. Meta-ontology shows that there is no one answer to the question of life. It depends on language, culture, and intellectual context. If we forget something, it's not just a mistake. It's something that makes us who we are. This is what the ethics of forgetting is all about. It looks at the conflict between morals and memory. Philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche and Paul Ricoeur say that forgetting is necessary for growth, even though society often values remembering. Nietzsche wrote in On the Genealogy of Morality that forgetting is a skill that can be used. He thought that without it, we'd be stuck in loops of anger and bad feelings from the past and not be able to move on. Nietzsche thought that forgetting is a moral tool that could help people and groups heal and grow by freeing them from anger and pain. But forgetting can be bad in some ways. Ricoeur wrote about how dangerous it is in memory, history, forgetting. Forgetting can help heal wounds, but it can also erase important facts. Ricoeur said that abusive forgetting was a form of violence because it silences people and changes the past. This tension is clear when people argue about how to remember the past. Societies that have been through a war, for example, have to decide whether to remember past crimes in great detail, which could lead to new wounds, or to make memories less painful, which would help people to get along again. Truth and reconciliation. Commissions try to find this balance between being accountable and getting along with others. The morality of forgetting is hard to deal with, even for me personally. Is it fair to hold on to every mistake, or can forgiveness, which is often linked to forgetting, help people get along again and get over their pain? The Ouroboros is a snake that eats its own tail, which represents an endless circle of making things and destroying them. The Ouroboros is one of the oldest symbols known to humans. It can be found in Egyptian writings, Greek philosophy, and alchemical papers. It shows a paradox, a circle that keeps going by itself, where the beginning and end blend together. The Ouroboros is more than just a shape. It makes us think about time, existence, and the world. In its most basic form, the Ouroboros is a system that includes itself. The ancient Greeks linked it to the idea of eternal return, which says that everything keeps going around and around in a circle. Stoics thought that the universe went through a burning process called ekpyrosis, where it was destroyed and then recreated. In this way, the Ouroboros represents life itself, making, breaking, and making again. It has to do with philosophical paradoxes like, this sentence is false. It is both true and false, making an endless loop. In his Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel used this idea to talk about conflicts that resolve into new forms, giving meaning a new start every time. In the field of science, the Ouroboros represents how the biggest and smallest things in the world interact with each other. The cosmic Ouroboros connects galaxies and quantum particles, pointing to a system that can keep going on its own, where starts and ends merge. But the Ouroboros is also unsettling, hinting at a world trapped in repetition. Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence posed a stark question. If your life repeated endlessly, would you embrace it or despair? Evil's lack of originality. Evil doesn't always come with horns and fire. Evil can show up quietly, in a gray suit, doing a job. This is what Hannah Arendt meant when she used the phrase, the banality of evil, in Eichmann in Jerusalem. What we think we know about what evil is, and how it works, is called into question. Adolf Eichmann, one of the main people who planned the Holocaust, went on trial in 1961. Many people thought he was evil. Arendt was surprised to see that Eichmann wasn't crazy, or even very smart. He was just an average guy who did what he was told, moved papers, and didn't think about whether what he was doing was right or wrong. Arendt called this the simple evil. Eichmann's crimes weren't motivated by deep hate. They were caused by him not thinking things through and blindly following the rules set by the system he worked for. He committed horrible crimes out of a sense of duty, not because he wanted to. Worryingly, this idea suggests that being evil doesn't always need hate. It does best in systems that don't let people think for themselves. When people lower themselves to just doing their job, unimaginable harm becomes possible. Ont said Eichmann's biggest crime was that he didn't think, decide, or take responsibility. Most evil is done by people who never decide whether they are good or bad, she wrote. Profound boredom. Being bored isn't just a bother, it's a discovery. This is the scary truth about deep boredom, which was studied by the German philosopher Martin Heidegger. Deep boredom isn't about not having anything fun to do. It's about not having anything meaningful to do. Heidegger said that deep boredom is a state in which nothing matters. Everyday things like work, hobbies, and relationships that keep you busy lose their hold. It takes a long time, and life seems empty. However, this isn't just sad for Heidegger, it's changing him. He said in his talks in 1929 that being deeply bored brings about a peculiar state in which one is held in limbo, cast back upon oneself. Deep boredom shows us how weak the things we depend on to give our lives meaning are. It's like staring into nothing, unsettling, but also a chance. We are left with the most basic questions. Why am I here? When life's usual, answers don't work. What am I here to do? It's hard to ignore these questions, which are often buried under the things that come up every day. Heidegger thought that this meeting with nothingness was both scary and important. There's a chance to change what meaning is by making it something we make, not something that is given to us. In times of profound boredom, when even passions feel hollow, we glimpse the limits of our constructed identities. The paradox is that deep boredom doesn't give us answers. It makes room for us to find them. Antinomy of pure reason. The world doesn't have a beginning, and it does. In his critique of pure reason, Immanuel Kant talks about the antinomies of pure reason. This paradox is at the heart of these ideas. Kant said that when reason tries to answer ultimate questions, it comes up with contradictions, or antinomies, where two statements that are at odds with each other seem to be true at the same time. Some things that seem to go against each other show us how little we really understand and know. Kant's first antinomy asks if there is a beginning to time for the world. As a first point of view, logic says the world must have a start. If time goes on forever, the present could never come about. Reason, on the other hand, says the world can't have a start, because if it did, it would need a cause, and that cause would need another, and so on. Both points seem to make sense, but they can't be put together. Kant explained that these contradictions occur because human reason applies principles beyond the world of experience. Concepts like space, time, and causality aren't intrinsic features of the world. They're the frameworks through which our minds understand it. Just as a fish, shaped by its experience of water, cannot imagine life outside it, our minds, shaped by space and time, cannot understand realities beyond these limits. The antinomies don't solve these questions. They reveal reason's boundaries. Kant argued that we can ask whether the universe is finite or internal, but the answers lie beyond our cognitive reach. Repressive desublimation. What if the freedom you think you're having is actually a trap? Herbert Marcuse's idea of repressive desublimation, which he talks about in One-Dimensional Man, makes us think again about the choices and wants we think free us. Marcuse builds on Freud's idea that society represses basic needs like sexuality and creativity, turning them into sublimation that fuels things like culture and art. But Marcuse says that repression doesn't go away in modern industrial societies. It just gets trickier. Our wants are controlled by modern consumer society, which makes us feel free while actually keeping control. This is repressive desublimation. Our wants are let out not to free us, but to keep us in line. Think about buying things. Buying things that define us is how we express our desire to be unique. Critiques of society are absorbed into entertainment, making opposition a commodity. Even resistance, like rock and roll, is turned into a business, which weakens its ability to stand up to the system. By giving us what we want right now, the system keeps us from wondering where those wants came from. Are our joys really ours? Or are they planned to keep things the same? Some people say Marcuse doesn't give people enough credit for their free will, but he wasn't minimizing our power. Instead, he told us to be careful. He thought that real freedom doesn't come from making decisions that are already made, but from questioning the system that makes those choices. Philosophical pessimism says that life is painful and not worth living. This is what philosophical pessimism is all about. The scary thought that existence itself is fundamentally flawed. Some thinkers, like Arthur Schopenhauer, say that life is not so much a gift as it is an endless battle where pain, boredom, and pointlessness loom over brief moments of happiness. Schopenhauer, who is known as the father of pessimism, thought that the will to live was a blind and unquenchable force that made all living things want to survive and reproduce. This will, he said, is what causes pain. He wrote in The World as Will and Representation. Life swings like a pendulum, back and forth between pain and boredom. Even when our wants are met, we become dissatisfied, and we have to look for new ones or stay stuck in nothingness. Schopenhauer thought that pain was meant to be greater than happiness. Pain is strong and can't be avoided, but happiness is short-lived and dull. Death seems like the only way out of this circle of pain in the end. Positive panpsychism. Positive panpsychism is a very different take on an old idea. Traditional panpsychism says that awareness is at the heart of everything, even the tiniest particles. Riccardo Manzotti, a philosopher, came up with negative panpsychism, which is a darker view. It says that awareness may be everywhere, but it may not feel like anything. This goes against one of our most basic beliefs, that awareness is subjective and connected to experience. Negative panpsychism says that even though reality is set up in a way that makes consciousness possible, most of it happens without us being aware of it. Things like atoms, rocks, and trees may have the basic properties needed for awareness, but they are too simple to create subjective experience. From this point of view, consciousness isn't a universal sentience. It's more of a possibility that is rarely achieved. In this world, every brick in the wall has everything it needs to think, but it never does. So, the brain wouldn't make consciousness out of thin air. It would just rearrange structures in a way that makes subjective experience happen. This fits with ideas that awareness can only appear in certain situations, needing the right amount of complexity and integration. Negative panpsychism brings up troubling issues. How did awareness come to be if it is so uncommon? Is self-awareness a mistake? A brief outlier in a world that doesn't care about anything else? The emptiness doctrine says that nothing exists on its own. To sum up, the emptiness doctrine is one of the most important ideas in Buddhist philosophy. It changes the way we think about existence. It's not nihilism. It's a huge shift in how you think. Nothing exists in and of itself. Everything comes into being through interconnectedness. In the 2nd century, the Indian philosopher Nagarjuna came up with the idea of jnata, which means emptiness. He said that causes, conditions, and relationships make everything, including things, thoughts, and even the self, possible. Nothing lives by itself. Just think about a tree. It looks strong and independent, but it needs water, air, sunlight, and soil. If these factors are taken away, the tree will not exist. There is no such thing as something that is not dependent. Since there is no such thing as something that is not empty, Nagarjuna wrote, emptiness doesn't mean that something is nothing. It means that it doesn't have a fixed, separate essence. This extends to the self. Who you are depends on relationships, society, and countless conditions. Without these, what remains? Understanding emptiness matters because, according to Nagarjuna, clinging to the idea of fixed identities causes pain. We try to hold on to stability in a world that is always changing, which makes us attached, afraid, and angry. Seeing how empty everything is frees us from this attachment and lets us live in peace with how things change. The emptiness doctrine shows that reality is not made up of separate things, but of an infinite number of links between them. Even though it's scary to think that nothing has its own soul, it's also freeing. Everything changes when you realize how everything is connected. What's wrong with hope? Hope has two sides. It makes us strong and helps us get through hard times, but it also ties us to an unclear future that leaves us open to being let down. The problem of hope asks if hope is a good thing or a bad thing. Friedrich Nietzsche was very critical of hope. He called it the most evil of evils. In Human, All Too Human, he wrote about Pandora's box, where hope and human suffering were both trapped. Nietzsche thought that hope wasn't a way to be saved, but rather a cruel way to keep pain going by holding us to impossible goals. Gabriel Marcel and other philosophers, on the other hand, saw hope as an act of faith in the face of doubt. Marcel wrote in Homo Viator that hope is fight, or not giving up when things look bad. It wasn't about promising a result. It was about confirming meaning, even when things looked hopeless. The two sides of hope lie in how it is used. Hope that isn't based in reality only leads to endless desire and disappointment when dreams don't come true. But Ernst Bloch thought that hope was important for growth. Bloch wrote in The Principle of Hope that real hope makes people do things instead of just waiting. It's not just wishful thought. It's a force for change and making the future better. Anthropic bias. Why does the universe feel so perfectly suited for life? Is it just a cosmic accident? Or are we just asking because we want to? This is the idea behind anthropic bias, which makes us think about how we see life. Thinkers like Nick Bostrom and Brandon Carter have looked into the anthropic principle, which is where anthropic bias comes from. It says that the fact that we are here to make observations about the universe changes those observations. We can only see universes that are able to support life, since we wouldn't be here to see everything else. Think of it this way. If you're in a place with air, you might think, how nice it is that I can breathe. You're only alive to ask because the air is already there. When it comes to the universe, the fact that it seems perfectly tuned for life isn't a surprise. We need it to exist. Things in the world that don't change, like the speed of light or the strength of gravity, are so perfectly set that even small changes would make life impossible. To some, this suggests a creator or a multiverse of countless uninhabitable worlds. But anthropic bias warns us. We can only observe a universe compatible with life, just as fish can't imagine a dry world. Nick Bostrom says that anthropic reasoning shows the limits of our view, while explaining how the world seems to be fine-tuned. It forces us to see how our existence changes the way we see the world. The veil of Maya. Everything you see, including people, the sky, and even your body, could be a trick. The veil of Maya is an idea from Indian philosophy, especially Advaita Vedanta, that is based on this idea. It says that the earthly world is just a cover for Brahman, the ultimate truth that makes everything possible. Maya, which in Sanskrit means illusion or magic, makes it look like there is separation in a world that is really one. Adi Shankaracharya, a very important figure in Vedanta, said, "Brahman alone is real. The world is illusion. The self is not other than Brahman." Maya keeps us stuck in the cycle of birth and death by making us think we are separate people. Think about a dream. Everything feels real in a dream, including happiness, sadness, and fear. When you wake up, though, you understand it was all in your head. In the same way, The veil of Maya makes us believe that our identities, battles, and wants are real, even though they are temporary. This idea is reflected in Western philosophy. Arthur Schopenhauer, who was inspired by Vedanta, said that life is always disappointing. He said that Maya was like a world where blind wants hide deeper truths. He thought that art and fasting gave him glimpses of what was real. How do we get the veil off? Vedanta offers ways to reach knowledge, jnana yoga, and self-realization. It says that your true essence is not your body or mind, but the endless consciousness that runs through them. This isn't about rejecting life, but seeing through it, experiencing it without connection. Unity, an unutterable truth where the seer, the seen, and the act of seeing are all one, is all that's left when the veil lifts. The question is whether you will wake up from the dream or stay stuck in it.